Hello everybody, welcome into our latest live broadcast. There I am. And today it is Wednesday, the 19th of February, 2025. We just were able to squeeze in a broadcast here at the last minute, and I did that because I have a lot of work to catch up on and I want to share it with you. I don't want to do it off camera. And what we have today is just replacing or finding a new home for the parts that came out of the Apache helicopter build. We feel that case is such a nice case even 4 years later that it deserves 4 years newer parts, and that the parts that were in it were great but no longer are fitting to that style of case. For that reason, a couple videos ago we dismantled the motherboard and the cooler along with the fan controller here, and I figured I was going to put it into another case. So I found the NZXT H5 Flow on sale at Amazon. I think the price is still on sale, $79.95. So by placing the cooler, I believe we can fit that right up front. Motherboard should fit in there like a glove. Add in the power supply, and we're done. It should be that easy. Everything's already been prepped. It's already got Windows. It's already got the RAM and everything tested, the solid state drive. None of that's going to change. We're just finding a new home for it that's more appropriate so that we can have a more appropriate build in the Apache helicopter that's more suitable to that level of case. That's how we got to where we are. In the meantime, just having the board out and exposed like this always makes me a little nervous, so I like to get to it as quickly as possible so it's in an enclosure and it's, you know, free from dust and dirt and static and all the other things that can happen when parts are just in the open, knocked to the ground, etc., depending on where it's placed, stepped on, and just feel better. Even if a build isn't completed, at least the parts are installed and everything, instead of having the case over here and the motherboard over there, keeps it easier for me to organize things when it's all together. And even if it's not done, it's still all in one place. Hello to everybody joining us in the chat room, and again, a little bit later broadcast than normal. Hello to our friend John Wilson. We call him Jack. Welcome in, Jack. Good to see you. And Daryl Loftus says hello. And Bradley Morris. Siniger says hello. There's Kevin saying hello, and Gil Garcia. Welcome in, guys. Secret Chopper says hello from Raleigh, North Carolina. Patrick Manny says hello, along with Doman 2000. William Denton joins us, and Ron Barnish says hello. There's Mecca Cameron joining us. Hey, that's a lot of people popping in here on a last-minute broadcast. Great to see you. Thank you so much for tuning in, as they say. All right, so the H5 NZXT case, I think at $80, it's a really good value. We've got the side glass panel right there. It includes a front and rear case fan. They're not RGB. We're going to remove that front fan. We should be able to fit this up front because it won't fit at the top. Pretty sure. I don't like my radiators on top. Whether it's going to be drawing air in or out, people often set things on top of their computer that will suffocate part of the radiator, or maybe even the whole radiator. So I think this doesn't fit a 360 millimeter on top anyway. So I really would like to see the RGB. That's the other thing. When the RGB is facing down, you almost have to look down at, at an angle to see it, which kind of defeats the purpose of having it. And if it's up front, then it should shine through this mesh here. And yeah, it should look fantastic. So that's what we're going to do today. Hey, Mark Baggett says hello. There's Toby White joining us. Welcome in, Toby. Rick Lakes from Minnesota. Matthew Groth says hello. And of course, Mara's hanging out in our chat room today. And she's our channel administrator. She keeps everything smoothly operating here. What we get with the case is some documentation, which, it's there if you need it. This case is relatively easy to open. We do only have one single USB Type A port up here. We've got a power button, one Type A, one Type C, and an audio jack, which is for either speakers or a microphone or a headset, which is both. It's a standard 3.5 millimeter jack. That's all there is. Now, I do feel a little robbed anytime I buy a case that only gives me one USB type A, because where that plugs in provides two. So what happens to the second one? You just don't get it. You paid for it on your motherboard, but the case manufacturer cheaped out because they didn't want to add the extra expense, and you lose a USB port. And I mean a fast one, that's a USB 3 port. I don't like that at all. Now, truth be told, I very rarely use more than one USB port up front. Most USB items like printers and keyboards and mice, all that gets plugged in the back anyway. And then usually a flash drive or something that I'm plugging in temporarily, that's what goes up front. So rarely would I need more than one. And usually it needs to be type A or type C. So at a bare minimum, it's okay. I'm disappointed because this is a mark of a discount Chinese-made case. That's what they do. So for NZXT to enter into that, I don't even know what to call it, that business methodology of just cutting it to be cheap, it wouldn't have added much price to the case to add that second USB port. And for you to add it, you basically have to buy a different case. So that's way more money than whatever the cost of adding the second USB port is, if that's important to you. Now, normally, that's important to me. However, because we're dealing with a used motherboard, this is a 10900K. It's still a $300 CPU. That is still $200 with a RAM. That's still a $200, $150 cooler. This is still a $150 motherboard. It's still going to need a new power supply, because so that's going to be anywhere from $60 to $160, depending on if we add a GPU or not. And, you know, even being 4 years old, you're still investing and you still have value here that if you go on Amazon right now and look up the price of these parts, you'll see, you know, you're right around $300 on a 10900K. And if that doesn't make you spit up your drink, look up a 14900KS, because those are almost $700. So for a lot of people who are like, oh, it's 5 years old or it's 4 years old, it still has a value, and the difference between each generation is about 10% of performance chip for chip. So 10900K versus an 11900K versus a 12900K, maybe about 10% on average. And most people, depending on what they use the computer for, most people won't even notice it anyway. But again, some people might. And those people, I don't really need to give them advice, because they're already at that level where they already know what they need, and they don't need me to tell them the difference between CPUs. But rest assured, if you want to go to Amazon and you want to buy these parts, they're still available brand new for sale. And you're looking about $300 for that chip. Now, when we bought the chip, it was probably between $500 and $600, so it has depreciated a little bit, but it's still a very strong contender in the marketplace of computers today. And a 4-year upgrade cycle is pretty normal for somebody that's really utilizing the computer for multiple resource-intensive tasks, as Mara does in video, thumbnail creation for the videos, along with there's a number of applications that she uses that are not common to the average user. So she always wants the latest and greatest to perform these tasks without the machine really bogging down or even crashing. As the machine gets bogged down and is dust builds, and if maintenance isn't being done regularly, things start happening like crashes or lockups. And then that's where the frustration begins. And if it starts happening regularly, there's the choice of wiping it and starting over, or just simply buying new parts if it's been a few years. Once this was wiped and everything was reinstalled, it's running fantastic. It's super fast. You'd be hard pressed to tell it from a 14900K. However, if you have to wipe and reinstall everything anyway, why not start with newer parts and do both at the same time, right? Get the upgrade and a nice clean install. And, you know, I'm happy to report on the Z890 ProArt Creator that she's got. She loves it. Everything's great. She would like the RGB and everything back on the Apache helicopter, but only if the Apache helicopter can outperform that Z890. Because she's already got the Ultra 9, the latest and greatest from Intel, there's nothing better to buy on the consumer side yet. But give it some time. There'll be a new chip, and the goal will be eventually, when we get that board, the new chipset, and the new chip, that will go into the Apache helicopter, and then we might rotate out the Z890 Creator. However, we might not, because the longer she uses it and the longer it keeps performing well, why fix it if it ain't broke, right? Just leave it alone. On the other hand, if we start running into some issues of random blue screens or lockups or freezes like this one was starting to do, it might make more sense to just, that'll be the excuse to swap them around. Always start with a fresh install. Anytime you're dealing with bizarre issues, it can build up over time. And depending on how many things you install and uninstall, how often you do that, the higher the likelihood you might have some stuff that's clogged up the registry that, you know, these system utilities are a waste of time. I don't recommend them. Nothing beats a clean install, reinstall your applications, and restore your data. It's not a big deal. I don't know why people freak out about it. It's really easy. And I realize some people have lost their software or whatever, but how are you ever going to solve that problem? All you're doing is procrastinating. If you're like, well, I don't have this software anymore. Yeah, and you know, it's gone. It doesn't exist, or you're going to have to repurchase it. You're going to have to, whether you do that now or you do that 10 years from now, it's coming. So why have that anxiety? Just nip it in the bud while you're thinking about it. Find the replacement or repurchase, or find the purchase history so you can get your license code back and get your installer back. Put that away so you won't be in that situation next time, and you'll be on the same page with me. If there's an issue, you can solve it yourself with a clean reinstall. This should not be something you do more than, say, once every 4 years, but I do know some people that will reinstall every time there's a minor little problem. I don't agree with that. Little problems can be fixed, but the random issues regarding severe problems where you're losing work or the system's lost stability, your standard BIOS updates, and of course, a nice clean install of Windows. If that doesn't remedy the problem, then you have a hardware problem. You may have some bad RAM or a flaky power supply, or there may be some piece of software you're installing that you've not updated because it's some old piece of software you lost the installer 4 years ago, and now some Windows update has exposed a flaw in that program that if the program writers followed all of Microsoft rules, this wouldn't happen. But a lot of companies, especially some programs some people have that I've never heard of, they just write the code and they'll update it later. They don't follow Microsoft's suggested rules. As a result, you know, you as a consumer don't know that, and you're not getting the updates because why would you? And it turns out that when you go look up your purchase history, you might find out there's a newer version of the software that is available for free to you that you're so afraid of, you know, if I lose it, I can't reinstall it. You got that piece of software from somewhere. And wherever that was, there's a purchase history. If it's pirated or stolen software, I don't have any empathy for you. That's part of the deal that you went into when you agreed to pirate or steal the software. You knew that. Not to mention it could be virus infected and spying on you and stealing everything without you knowing. Hey, you know, you feel like you're getting away with something, but it will eventually come back around to haunt you. And it's situations like this where a very simple fix, now you're hesitating and hemming and hawing because, oh no, where am I going to steal that software again? It's going to be really hard for me or any other technician to feel any empathy. You set that up. Whenever you set it up, and these are your consequences that you should have known were coming. So I got no sympathy for that. But oftentimes when people just simply reach out legitimately to the company they purchased the software from, the company's more than happy to provide the software again upon opening a support ticket and asking. It's really simple. And oftentimes it's not uncommon for people to get a free upgrade to the software, that it's been updated and you just never knew because you're afraid of changing anything. So usually this is really good for the end user. This makes everything better and could have been the very cause of the problem right from the beginning, right? So with all that in mind, this has been reset. It's back to new again. And let's give it a new home here in this case. £10 from our friend Mark Gaines in Super Chat. Well, thank you, Mark. It's like making a backup, you know, people can't be bothered. Whoops. Camera likes to focus on that black side panel, and then everything goes out of focus. It's hard to feel empathy or feel sorry for somebody who has been warned and warned and warned, and they do it anyway, or they don't do. Doctor tells you to stop smoking, you don't stop smoking, you get lung cancer, and things turn south. It's terrible, but it wasn't like, you know, in situations like that, you couldn't have done something to avoid it. So when people knowingly and willfully make bad decisions and figure I'll deal with the consequences later, that means when you have a computer problem, you will likely procrastinate getting it solved, and you will live with a perfectly fine working computer that you think is bad and you need to replace it. I probably sold, I mean, it's hard to put a number on it, but there's a certain percentage of computers that I sell to people who are convinced their old computer just needs to be replaced because it's no longer reliable. There are certain, most of the time, if that's the reason, because it's not reliable, it's something the user has done to it. It's something very easy to fix. At the same time, if the user also feels like it's a good excuse to just replace it, we're okay with that too. Like I said, kill two birds with one stone. On a new computer, you're going to start over anyway. So if you're starting over anyway, why do it on the old one? But it depends how old the old one is. Is the old one a year old? So anyway, each person to decide for themselves, and of course accept whatever the cost of that is, whether you do it or the cost of it if you don't do it, versus the consequences of the benefit of a faster, more reliable system, and you know, the risks involved with just continuing to limp by because it's good enough. So, you know, I can't tell people what to do, but I could certainly advise them what's in their best interest. At the end of the day, it's really up to each individual to make what is hopefully an informed decision and then set their expectations accordingly. All right, that's all I'm trying to say. Don't sit there and ignore it thinking it's going to fix itself. It's going to get worse and worse and worse until it just doesn't work anymore. And what could have been a relatively simple and inexpensive fix, by procrastinating it, makes it worse and worse, takes more time to fix, costs more money. I'm okay either way. So I just want you to make an informed decision that's right for you. That came off real easy. There's no thumb screw or anything to hold that in. I'll set that down over here. And we'll take this other panel off. This is the one that's messing with the camera. When I turn it towards the camera, the autofocus reflects off the black surface and everything goes out of focus. That one just slides back about a 1/4 inch, and then that panel comes off. You'll see there's an area here where it can breathe. That's down underneath the shroud here. What's interesting on this case design that surprised me is this indentation, which you may not be able to pick up because it's so dark. It's a neat little design. I don't know how noticeable that really is, but that does seem to be a little different from the other previous H5 we've worked on in the past. So NZXT has made some minor modifications to the layout. This is a full-size ATX case. You can tell because you have 7 slots back here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If it had 5 or 4, that would be micro ATX. If it had 2, that would be mini ITX. If you're not sure, if you're looking at pictures online of a case and you're not sure if mid-tower means it's micro ATX or ATX, just look at a picture that shows the number of slots. 7 slots, you're a regular ATX size case, regardless of its dimensions. Around the back, we've got a cardboard box. This contains all of the screws, everything you need to mount the motherboard or drives or anything else you're adding, power supply, etc. These screws are unique to each case, from each case manufacturer. They are not necessarily interchangeable. You're not intended to use all of them unless you really fill this thing from bottom to top and front to back, which would be excessive. That would suggest to me your case is too small. But you should have leftovers, and you should save those for any future upgrades, repairs. You want to use the screws that came with the case. And if you sell the case, you should include the screws. It would be a nice thing to do, so the next person has them if they want to make any modifications, repairs, or upgrades. How is that being held in? It looks like there's a wire tie, zip tie, wire tie. I don't know. There's a little thumb screw down here. This is the 3.5-inch hard drive cage. More and more of these 3.5-inch drives are going away. They're typically being used in servers and network attached storage devices and less in desktops because while they do have a large capacity, they are painfully slow and noisy. So the development of mechanical hard drives is continuing with, I think, Western Digital announcing they're going to release a 44 terabyte capacity drive next year and should reach a 100 terabyte mechanical drive in 5 years. However, it's not for a home user. Well, a home user can use it. I mean, you could also drive a school bus by yourself back and forth to work as your daily driver. Why would you? It's not intended for that purpose, but that doesn't mean there's any law that prevents you from doing it. It would just be bizarre. It would be like very expensive, impractical, difficult to park, expensive on gas. All for what? Just because someone said you shouldn't do it? You know, that's fine. If you have that kind of time and money, have at it. But for the rest of us who want to remain practical, do be aware that hard drives are starting to fade out because they're also far less reliable. Again, they're noisy, they consume more power, and they're just terribly slow by today's solid-state drive standards. That being said, obviously you decide for yourself if you're willing to sacrifice performance in order to have capacity. That's your choice. You could do both. You could have a faster bootable SSD and a larger mechanical drive. The problem is when you keep it in the case, how do you back it up? It's so much better, in my opinion, to use some sort of large storage externally, whether that's through USB, Thunderbolt, network attached storage. Any of that's better than putting it in the computer. The minute you put it in the computer, you've just barred yourself off from, you've just created a bubble. And if anything pops that bubble, I don't want to be in your shoes with the stress and anxiety that creates. I'm talking about power fluctuations, power supply failures, viruses, and ransomware. It is a nightmare of psychological trauma that people suffer when they put literally all their eggs into one basket. If you have those kind of large storage needs, I strongly recommend you get them outside of your case. At least you limit the damage. So if something, whether it's a power spike or a virus or ransomware, at least by having the drive externally, you have the potential option of simply plugging that drive into another computer, even if it's just temporarily. That reduces your losses. So now you just have to deal with what's going on here and not necessarily what's going on outside of it. And the reverse is true. If something were to happen externally, it doesn't affect it internally. And this gives you more power, control, and gives you a much less stressful, and believe me, any of these things are stressful, but when it's all of it at the same time, which is what you're setting yourself up for when you load these things up with storage, have at it. If I'm not there, start without me. There are exceptions, of course. I've certainly seen gaming systems where we have a solid state drive to be the boot drive, and then a large storage drive, mechanical drive, for loading these massive games, or in some cases a scratch area, what we call scratch area, for large video production and project files in AutoCAD and etc. That's just one mechanical drive. Anything more than that, I think, is a complete error in judgment from somebody who obviously doesn't care about power consumption, heat, noise, or reliability. So you can do it. Nobody's telling you not to, but it's profoundly impractical and unwise with what we have available today. Again, there's always exceptions. There's always going to be somebody who has some special use case scenario that would justify more than one. But if you're one of those people, there's no reason you're watching my channel for advice, because you already know this. And so I don't need to preach to the choir on that. However, it's best avoided when possible, having a mechanical drive. And if you absolutely need one, just get one big one, be done with it. I'm telling you, your life will be so much more stress-free. That being said, I want to just continue here. These are our front port umbilicals. This is the box that's been wire tied to the hard drive cage. And you'll see these hard drive cages, if you just go back and look at my older videos, just as sort of proof of what I'm telling you isn't my feelings, it's just what's happening. These cages are getting smaller and smaller. This cage right here is only going to hold two 2.5-inch drives. This isn't even wide enough to hold a 3.5-inch drive. So now where are you going to put a mechanical drive in this? I'm not even sure. It might still hold one somewhere. And it's just another reason to put it external. Get a USB dock if you need to, or just buy an external USB drive, or use a NAS. Your life will be so much easier. I guess maybe I'm making an assumption that people like easy lives. I might be making an assumption that people try to avoid stress. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people really like chaos and drama and stress and psychological trauma. To each their own, but I prefer to avoid that stuff when possible. It looks like a 3.5-inch drive will sit right on top. So one 3.5-inch drive up here, two 2.5-inch drives here. This really should just go in the garbage. It's complete waste as far as I'm concerned. For the vast majority of customers, this is completely wasteful. I anticipate as we move forward in a couple of years, not only have we lost the optical drive bays, these are going next. Just be ready for it. I'm going to put that back in there. At least it goes in and out easily, so if you want to remove it and remove the dead weight from the system if you're not using it. I also like how shallow it is with regards that it's not going to impede a long power supply, or specifically a modular one where you might have to get between here and the back of the power supply to add or remove cables for additional items you might be adding to the computer, specifically higher end GPUs. And even those are probably going the way as well. As onboard video becomes more and more powerful, I don't think we're going to see onboard discrete, I don't think we're going to see these discrete GPUs gaining in popularity. I think we're starting to see the beginning of the end with the 50 series RTX cards. And the pricing and the performance, in some cases the performance is worse on older games. They're out of reach for most people financially. And the onboard graphics are getting better and better. So that, I think hard drives will go first. I think discrete graphics cards, except for some pretty high-end industrial business use, will probably fade out. They'll always be on the market. You know, there'll always be something, but it won't. It's just fading. It's starting to go away. The market is changing. Consumers are changing what they're buying. And companies have to stay in business. So if people aren't buying it, there's no point in making it anymore. However, with business, that's a different game altogether. Now, with that being said, I just want to continue figuring out how we can take this apart so we can, well, I got to get this front fan out of here because I want to make sure I can fit that radiator in here. As far as cases go, I think it's, you know, for $80, you'll see everything's really nice as far as how it snaps together. There's nothing that's confused me where I have to look at a manual. Everything is very intuitive and pretty much straightforward, and that's what I expect from NZXT. It's also not over the top fancy, right? It's not a $200 case. It's an $80, well, on sale it's $80. That's with free shipping, by the way. And it even has a little cable management right here with these Velcro ties, so that'll go, we can run our cables right through here. That's what these little catches are for. Help keep our cables aligned. That's a nice touch. A lot of cheap cables don't give you that consideration. Okay, let's take that fan out. I should probably get my glasses. Now the great thing about removing this fan is I will keep the fan and the screws together with the case. So if the rear case fan should ever fail, and they will fail eventually, the the fan we just removed will become like a spare tire, right? You just swap the fan out. It's the same exact make and model and brand of fan from the front to the back. Nothing's different. Just an extra one. We didn't pay extra for it. In fact, if we're not going to have a discrete graphics card, if we're only going to use onboard video, you don't need the front fan to be hooked up anyway. That's just going to draw in more dust and dirt, create more noise, and use more power. There's no reason to have it. Just maybe a placebo to make you feel good. And you know, look, if you want to keep it in there because it makes you feel good, far be it from me to tell you not to feel good, but it's psychological, it's not practical. So you decide for yourself, again, making an informed decision as to why we're selecting the parts we selected and why we're installing them the way we're installing them. And sometimes we're going for an aesthetic look, right? That's more emotional. And here we're trying to do something that is both aesthetic in the sense that we've got RGB RAM and RGB fans and water block, but also not so over the top that it's a Las Vegas marquee and there's a lot of money being invested. In fact, I wouldn't have bought any of this. It's already been bought, and we're just trying to find another way to utilize it because it's still good. Nothing wrong with it. It's just a little older. One might say the same thing about me. So these are all our front port umbilicals, which I had to undo to get this front case fan removed here. Like I say, there's really nothing special about it. It's only a 3-pin fan anyway. It's not even a 4-pin. So as far as fans go, it's pretty low on the quality side, but it's from NZXT, which puts it higher up on quality side than some non-name brand fans that you could buy off, you know, eBay or Amazon or whatever. Let me just set that down here for now. Just get that out of my way. And okay, so the radiator. My concern is this radiator going to fit? I can see these are going to be an issue with me here. See how they're catching everything on the desk. For right now, I'm going to just put these in here, just so I can spin this around and show you. We should have a nice big opening here for the radiator to fit. And then what we can do is we can take the fans off, attach the fans on this side with the radiator behind it, and we don't even have to use screws on the other side. So it's a very easy installation. Now the question is, because I've left the water block attached, if I want to remove that water block to make my installation easier, or if I want to do it the hard way and leave everything attached. And if you know me, you know I'm going to choose the hard way. Now keep in mind, the motherboard has a built-in I/O shield. So this hole back here, sometimes depending on the board you're using, you have to install an I/O shield separately. This was a very expensive board. The more expensive and more modern the board is, the less likely it has a separate I/O shield. It's more modern now for most motherboards of any quality these days to have that already built in, and it's one less thing you got to worry about. So we're ready to install this. Now we have 1, 2, 3 mounting holes across the bottom, 1, 2, 3 across the middle, 1, 2, 3 across the top. This does not have the optional 10th hole that I fought with ASRock and Cooler Master. And if it did have the 10th hole, we do have a spot for it right here. And I'll bet you we have spare standoffs, which was the point I was trying to make about that $400 case. This is an $80 case. How much you want to bet there's a spare standoff or two in here? Let's see what we got. Oh, look at that. We got nylon zip ties, an empty box. And look at there, a spare standoff. One spare standoff with a socket right there. That Cooler Master couldn't give us for a $400 case. That NZXT just throws in on an $80 case. And of course, Murphy's Law, we don't need it. We needed it when we didn't have it. I can't make this up, man. What are you gonna do? So let's go ahead and figure out how am I gonna get this installed. I think the first thing I wanna do is lay the case flat, especially when working with these parts connected, which is, again, it's working the hard way. Let me utilize gravity to work with me rather than against me. Find a way to go with the flow. If the tide or the flow of the river is moving in this direction, stop trying to paddle against it. You're working much harder. I mean, unless you absolutely have to, find a way to go the way the flow to get you where you want to go. You're still steering. You're not giving up and letting it take you wherever it wants. But you're figuring out how to utilize what's ahead of you or what's in front of you instead of fighting against it. And that's a process I try to utilize as much as possible as a philosophy in both building and repair. Now, it doesn't mean I'm always successful, but it's always my intention. All right, so let me pick up both of these. I'm going to grab it by the block here because that's a safe way to pick it up. And I'm going to just drag this in and just dry fit it and make sure everything aligns properly. Now, I will say it does look like we've got a couple of cables in the way. And what I want to do, we've got this big wad of cables right here coming out of the fans and going into the fan controller. And it'll make my life a lot easier if I at least remove the fan controller. This can be attached later. It's bad enough to have the radiator still connected to the motherboard, but then to have the fan connector, the fan controller connected to the fans, it's just more things in a chain that make the chain harder to straighten out without tangling up and getting in its own way. So we're going to remove all that and minimize how much stuff we are working around here. On top of that, this fan controller, it plugs into a USB port. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug that from the motherboard as well. That did not need to stay connected. The reason I left it that way was so I didn't misplace it or pair it with a different. I got lots of motherboards laying around here. And I want to make sure I'm using the right fan controller with the right hardware. So I try and keep everything together, and then I don't have to, you know, try and figure out what was supposed to be there. And where's this going? This goes from here. Oh, I see. That's coming off of the water block. So in that case, we've got to remove it from this side. And then I can move that up and over here. Now I should be able to set the board down. Now, because we still have the rear case fan in, we want to make sure that the rear case fan power cable is not getting caught up on the corner of the motherboard. And then the radiator will likely go in, well, I'm going to have to move the fans to the other side. All right, so the fans right now, look, I could leave this exactly like it is if I want to. I could just leave that alone, I think. I could be wrong. Let's just try dry fitting this. Turn it around this way, maybe. We have two options here. Now, the way it was installed in the Apache helicopter, where the fans were on the inside of the computer, blowing air out the, well, in this case, it was the back of the motherboard, or to the back of the case, rather, beside the motherboard. When we put this in the front, there's a couple of considerations. One is, if we put fans on this side, will the fans stick out too far that we can't put the bezel back on? If some bezels are thicker or some bezels are thinner. This one, I think, is too thin now that I'm looking at it. I don't think we can put the fans on this side as I initially thought was possible on this case design, but there are other case designs where that's an option. We could also simply change the fans and move them behind this, right? So that we see the fans from the front, but then we don't see the fans from the inside, and it means we have to change the side of where the fans are. And we would want the fans blowing air into the case. But that also means we're running a potentially hot air from the front of the computer into the inside of the computer. But if we turn the fans around the other way and they're exposed on the front, they'll look backwards, and you're going to see all the supports and all of the cool RGBs will be sandwiched between the radiator, and you won't see it. So there's no right or wrong way here. It's a personal preference. But I feel like, you know, now that I'm looking at it, in my head I envisioned having the fans outside. But now that I see it, if we take that front panel back, which is this piece right here, this is way too thin. When we put this back on, We'd have to have very slim fans for that to work. So clearly, that's not a good idea. Also, there's no dust filter here. So this will make a much better exhaust, even though it's the front of the computer. Normally, the front of the computer, you want air going in, but we can reverse that. We can put a reverse fan, or turn this fan around is all we have to do. So it draws air in from the back and it sucks it in through the radiator and out the front. There is no rule that says one direction or the other is superior, as long as it's all moving in the same direction. Now, again, I could turn the fans around, but if I turn these fans around, the RGB will face the radiator, where you won't really be able to see it clearly. It's not as visually stunning. You can understand that by adding RGB, you're adding not only cost, but also wiring, fan controllers in some cases, additional cable management that has to be considered. There's just so much going on to add those pretty colors. Is it worth it? It gets to a point where maybe a little bit's cool, but too much of it, no. Again, putting the radiator up at the top, I don't believe this will support a 360 millimeter radiator up top. I think it only do 240, I think is what it'll do. I could be wrong, but it just looks like it's not going to fit. And I don't like the fans being on top, whether they're intake or exhaust, because you just start setting stuff on top of the case and you're suffocating your radiator. And you can't see the RGB from the top. What's the point? At least with regards to RGB. So without being scripted, without having any rehearsal and without working with this particular case before with these parts, as a computer tech, my job is to find solutions to problems and to do it immediately, not to just say, okay, I understand the problem. Let me go away and study this for a while and I'll come back. I don't get that opportunity in the real world. Systems are down, companies aren't working, employees aren't able to help customers. Customers get impatient and take their business somewhere else. A system like this wouldn't be in a company anyway because of the RGB, because of the complexity, the ongoing maintenance and cost. The companies wouldn't do this. But for home users, if you follow the same kind of idealism that companies have about budget, investment, and maintenance cost and ongoing ownership cost, you just decide accordingly what you want to do and understand these areas where you're stepping outside of a normal business decision. You're going to find out why businesses don't do that the hard way. It'll all make sense to you when you start dealing with the problems and the extra expense and how discouraging it is financially and how discouraging it can be for maintenance and upgrades. If you just have one computer and you work on it once every 2 years, it might be fun for you. But when people are counting on you and time is ticking, if it's your money and you've run out of money and now you can't afford to fix it, and you just have a computer that's otherwise perfectly works fine and looks great, but now there's just no money left to give it what it needs because it needs a little babying, you set yourself up for that, Simple is always preferred. If we can get a nice, good, powerful system, that's the default #1 concern. Quality parts, good price, easy to get, nothing we're on a waiting list for, nothing that's the latest and greatest that's going to need a lot of updates and learning curve, leading edge type stuff. Nobody buys a Ferrari because of their reliability or their gas mileage. So we're trying to find that comfortable middle ground between the cheapest stuff that's out there that likely isn't built very well and doesn't perform very well, versus the ultra expensive, which can perform very well but can be very finicky and expensive to acquire and difficult to maintain. And in the middle, that's where I'm always aiming, right down the middle. So with this build, I went a little excessive because it was a build that was primarily emphasizing the RGB, the look of it, with the performance being secondary. That added quite a bit of cost and complexity to the build. And so I will not be putting all of the RGB stuff back in. We're limiting it just to the RGB RAM and the RGB fans on the radiator. Now, maybe later on, if I want to change the rear fan to RGB, I could, but nobody's really going to see it. But that's a relatively minor expense. It does add one more wire, but that'll be the end of it. Like, I won't be putting any more RGB on this. So I've got it laid out here, and I'm just looking at overall, is this how I want it to be? One thing I don't like right now is the fans were set into an orientation where the cables were facing the motherboard tray. By turning the radiator, the fan cables are now facing the front of the case where they're ugly and visible. So at the very least, the fans need to be removed, turned 180 degrees, and put back on again. That's something we want to figure out now before we get everything mounted in. We will end up using the screws we removed from this side of the radiator because that's what's going to hold it here. Remember, none of this has to do with how the radiator is cooling. It's going to cool no differently if we mount it front ways, inside out, upside down. It doesn't matter. That's the aesthetic part. And you can thank people that wanted to put glass covers on their cases for that becoming a trend. And in the 90s, this wasn't a thing, right? You put the cover on, it's a steel cover, no differently than the back. If you put money in RGB, no one would ever see it. So it is what it is, and these are the times we live in, but it's still optional and not required. And it does cost extra and makes your build more complex. You just know what to expect. If you're good with it, I'm good with it. But if you're shocked and you're like, oh my, I can't believe how difficult this was, probably because you spent more and went over the top on things because you were more enthralled with how it looks than how it performs. When I build systems for businesses, they don't have any of this. In fact, any amount of time I've talked, I've already had a system built for a business that'll likely run for 10 years without a problem. More parts, more problems. All right, let's see what's going on in the chat room. Thomas Back-T says hello. There's Brad Revel joining us. I see Jonathan in there. Freak PC says hello. And Bernard C says hello. John Williams joining us. I'll sometimes hear from the consumer audience of YouTube. That's what YouTube generally attracts. Not much in the way of business, a little bit, but mostly just end users who have very strong opinions regarding pre-built computers, which I find humorous because in the industry, I know that Dell and HP sell more computers every year in the last 10 years than any amount of systems that, or motherboards or chips that these individuals like. And they're the bread and butter of business and economy when it comes to computing and IT in the whole business side of things. If you want to Google how many computers Dell and HP sold in the year 2024, I think you'll be gobsmacked at just how large that number is. And then at 2023, how many did they sell? And in 2022, how many did they sell? And if all these computers are lasting 6 to 8 years on average, let's just say, add all those numbers up for the last 6 to 8 years, take all those millions of computers they've sold between Dell and HP, add them together, and then add the years for the last 8 years, and tell me what size number you get to. Now, if these machines were so terrible, if these machines were so inept and so bad, what outsells them? Nothing. Nothing else does it. You say, well, I could make a better system. Yeah, you could, but the average computer owner couldn't care less. Whatever it is you're seeing that's to you superior, the other regular end users don't notice it and think you're out of your mind, that you would care about such ridiculous things. So what you might find very critical and important, the average computer owner, even when you explain it to them, will just look at you like you've lost your mind. It doesn't mean you're wrong, but it means you're an enthusiast. And enthusiasts do not make up the majority of computer owners. Enthusiasts don't supply businesses, in general, big business, with computers. That's done by other big businesses. And at the end of the day, that's what gets people jobs. That's what gets people paid. That's what gets customers helped. And that is really where all of the IT work is at. That's where the money is. Custom builds, you're not going to make any money on them. Let me rephrase, you're going to work a lot harder to try and earn a buck. Whereas in corporate IT, the work won't be as difficult. There's a lot more pressure, but the work is nowhere near as difficult. It's not as complex. And, you can have a rewarding career for decades if you choose that path. If you choose to identify end users, consumers, and gamers, that is a tough way to make a buck today, let me tell you. Tim Sowell says hello. Welcome in, Tim. Mortant joins us and says hello. So anyway, enjoy the enthusiast YouTube channels, but understand they're enthusiasts. It's just not the way the world works overall. And we'd certainly like to see, me personally would like to see more videos exposing where the hundreds of millions of dollars are being invested in IT and computers. It's not the home users. Not to put them down in any way. It's not an insult. It's just that's the way it is. And if you want to get into this line of work and you want to stay busy, corporate work, business work is what's going to keep you busy. All right. If I go ahead and mount the motherboard now, I'm not going to be able to get those fans off and turn them around. I think I am going to end up removing the block, the water block, which isn't the end of the world. It's 4 screws. I'm probably making a bigger deal out of it than it really is. I'm just trying to be lazy, and at the end of the day, it's probably 2 minutes of work. I don't have to replace the thermal compound as long as I don't wipe any of the thermal compound away from either surface. Just put it right back on the same way it was. You don't have to. In most cases, thermal compound replacement is completely unnecessary. It makes people feel good, but it actually doesn't do much, usually. There are always some exceptions, but they're so rare. Sometimes you'll see somebody take apart a laptop or they're cleaning a PC, and they show you all the dust that was in the filters and in the heat sinks and in the fans, and they clean the fans and they clean the heat sinks. That's going to make the big difference on the cooling performance of the machine. And they're like, well, let's just go ahead and change the thermal material on this laptop or this desktop. That's just being thorough, but it ultimately, in most cases, makes no difference whatsoever other than it makes people feel good. And what I wish some of these channels would do was show you. In other words, we're going to do the dust cleanup. We're not going to touch the thermal material. We're going to heat test it before and after. And you're going to see a massive improvement. If there is one to be had, that's where it's at. Then, after they've tested it again with a load, a resource intense load on it, measured the maximum heat, then go and change the thermal material and run that test again, you probably won't notice much of any difference. You've got to allow a 3 degrees Celsius plus or minus variance because of room temperature changes that occur naturally in your environment unless you have a temperature controlled room. And by that I mean a sealed off room typically found only in large corporations that is thermostatically set to not vary by much degree, which would be a very expensive room to build. Some places do have them, and they do not represent what your room is. So even if in a temperature controlled room that was designed to not vary the temperature to control it very tightly, that's no representation of what your experience will be at home. So just because it works well in that environment is great if you're using it in that environment. But in your environment is where you need to run the test. And I trust your environment is, the temperature is not controlled. It's controlled within a variance of degrees, plus or minus, what we call margin of error when it comes to measuring heat. And it varies from room to room. It varies from house to house. It varies from equipment to other equipment. There's so many variables here. That's why you have to allow a margin for error. So that being said, trying to replicate the exact same temps over and over and over again, it's going to be highly unlikely. Running the same test on the same hardware in the same room just later in the day, earlier in the day, or on a different day will yield likely slightly different results within what's called the margin of error. So if changing your thermal compound only results in a temperature difference of margin of error, it was a waste of time, other than you just wanted to and it made you feel good. If that's how you want to spend your time and money, have at it. There are rare, and I do mean rare, occasions where changing the thermal compound makes any noticeable difference beyond margin of error, but they're so rare, the likelihood of you buying a lottery ticket is probably pretty close to you experiencing thermal compound making a difference. But again, sometimes people see what they want to see. Never, ever in my career working for corporate America have we ever replaced thermal compound just as a maintenance routine. It's never been done. I've been in this business 34 years. It's something consumers do. It's nothing businesses do. I've never seen it. So anyway, it just strikes me as weird when you look at both sides of it. I understand why businesses don't do it, but I don't understand why consumers do it. Other than they just don't know. They're just convinced this is helpful. Or they think it's fun. They just want to do it because it's fun. It's okay. I'm not telling you not to. Just want you to understand what to expect if you do that. I'm going to grab my scissors and we're going to separate these little bags of screws. Again, I like how NZXT has labeled what each bag contains. So this says there are 6 30-seconds by 5mm screws. These are likely what hold the motherboard in, along with mechanical drives. Then we have the next bag, and these are perforated. It's just the perforation, it wants to tear the bag open, so I'm just trying to use scissors to avoid accidentally tearing a bag open. This contains M3 screws that are 5mm. These are fan screws, so these are for case fans. And why they're including these, there's no other fans, in my opinion, you should be adding to this case under any circumstances. But makes people feel good to spend their money and be wasteful. There you go. These longer screws are for placing case fans up at the top of the case where you perhaps you need to go through a thicker bezel. I'm not quite sure why they're included in this case, because I don't see anywhere, I'm not noticing anywhere where the longer screws are required. This just kind of feels like a package of screws that gets included whether you need them or not with every NZXT case. I just can't imagine a scenario where you would use these on this case specifically. Finally, there's two bags left. One is the extra motherboard standoff and the little socket for it. And the socket just enables you to use a Phillips screwdriver instead of a proper 5mm hex head, which of course I use a 5mm hex head because I believe in using the right tool for the job, and I work on computers for a living, so you know, I don't want to be a hack job. And then finally, we've got 4 standard hex head case screws. These are very common. They've been around since the 80s. These are black and they're intended to hold the power supply in. Usually your power supply also includes the same 4 screws, but they might be silver or not. They might exactly be the same. It doesn't matter which ones you use. All right? It's a little redundancy on the power supply. I don't know why. I've never seen a power supply not come with screws, and it's weird to me that the case manufacturers include screws for the power supply. I understand the case manufacturers include screws for adding fans, adding motherboards. The radiator comes with all the screws it needs. And usually if you buy fans, they also come with the screws. Unless you have a specific case design where you've got to go a much longer distance, that's what these screws are for. Which again, as far as I can tell, this case does not require those. As far as I can tell, there's no place for those to go. So I think that this whole kit of screws just universally goes in all their cases. But I'm guessing. With that, let's grab what I believe are the motherboard screws. These are called 6-32 by 5mm. And we'll check and see. We should need 9 of these. And we'll just verify that these turn properly into the standoffs. If we've got the wrong screw, it'll either, like if the screw threads are too fine and the insert inside of the standoff is too wide, it won't go in straight. It may go on it. It may go crooked. It's just not going to fit. And if the threads inside of the standoff are fine threads and we try to put a coarse screw in there, it just won't even get started. So I'm going to use a regular screwdriver here so I don't accidentally strip anything out with a power driver. Just test and see if that's going to fit in there okay. Going in. Not going in. How about now? Still not going in. So either I don't have the motherboard aligned correctly, or it needs a finer thread screw. Not sure yet. Give me just 1 second here to get that adjusted. Oh, it's definitely going in now. And it's tightening. So those are the correct screws for installing the motherboard. Now, though the motherboard has 9 holes, the center hole, the standoff on the motherboard here, the center standoff has a pin, and that goes through the hole in the board to hold the board in position for you. On some cases, it'll also still take a screw. Most of the time, it doesn't. In this case, it does not. So of the 9 holes, we're going to put screws in 8 of them, and the 9th one is held in place with the standoff that's different than all the others, but it's not an empty hole. There is something behind it that is purposefully there, providing support and alignment to the board. But now that I've gotten started and I know I've got the right screws, I can switch to my electric. I put my electric driver on a clutch speed of 3 so I don't over tighten. And while the exact tension on the screws is not important for my own sanity and continuity, I like them all to be the same. And with as many boards as I build and disassemble, to be able to use an electric driver versus have carpal tunnel syndrome, I'd much rather let the driver do the work. And I don't want to tighten these all the way down, so if you notice the screwdriver is stopping and I back it back off, that's why I'm doing it, because I still need the motherboard to just wiggle around a little bit for proper alignment. See right there, it's just not aligning right, and that means we have to adjust the board. And that may be very difficult if I've over tightened any of these screws. We gotta get them started, but just keep them loose. And that should give a little bit of play in the board so that we can get all the screws started. Once they're all started, then we tighten them down. And that's why. Things do seem a little misaligned here. I'm not sure why. What I'm seeing on my side of things is the board appears to be tilted. Like the rear mounts are lining up, but the front mounts are just a few millimeters towards the top. And that maybe I don't have the board seated correctly. So don't force anything. If things aren't going together easily, before we take it too far, let's take the 2 screws out we've already put in, and let's pick the board up and reseat it. Because if you seat it correctly, you shouldn't have to struggle with it. And if you try and force it, you could break something, and at the very least, you're working harder than you need to. So we want to go with the flow here. It's still not quite lined up. And the issue I'm having is this corner closest to me. It is very off, and I'm not sure why. That rear fan power cable may be getting caught up underneath and causing a misalignment, or something else is happening. I want to push the motherboard this way. It did move, and now everything looks lined up. We're going to try this one more time. This time, I'm going to start with the place that was difficult to get started before. Let's start there now. See if I have better luck. So one issue I have, and the reason I have this long extension, is to get straight down up against the bottom of this case, but into that corner, I'm hitting the edge of the driver. So it looks like we're going to be turning these by hand because there's really no safe way for me to get the screw without the screw starting to bend and tilt and potentially strip out the threads of the standoff behind it. Now, if we're taking screws out, electric screwdrivers are always safe to remove screws, but when we're putting them in, that's where we want to be cautious. And when we get into the corners, and depending on the case, this case is really tight on the corners. So not only does this screwdriver even have to be tilted, you know, when we get a cooler, sometimes they include a long driver like this, and that allows us better access. Oh, that's so much better. And even though it wasn't sold to us for this purpose, it's a good reason to keep it in your toolkit if your cooler came with a long screwdriver. It's a Phillips end. Those really come in handy when you're doing work in the corners of motherboard installation and removal. On some cases, like this one. Now, if this case were taller, we'd have a lot more room in those corners. And again, I don't want to tighten the screws down. I simply want to get them all started. And honestly, it's so easy with the big driver here. It's not really doing anything with repetitive stress with my wrist, and the screws are short. So that's the other thing. If you're putting a screw in this long, poof, an electric driver sure does make life a lot easier. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7. A little bit of an alignment issue on the top middle. So this one does not want to go in. Something isn't right. So again, I don't want to force anything. And it's also very dark and hard to see as I work my way up. And that's where a flashlight could be one of your favorite tools of your toolkit. Sometimes people reach out and go, you know, what's the best tool? You know, look, basics. Keep it basic. I've got a nice bright light here. And let's see why that screw isn't going in straight. You can usually tell if the standoff is, yeah, in this case, the standoff is a little bit close to me and the motherboard's a little too far away. So if I push the motherboard towards me, we'll see if it moves. And again, we've got to make sure we didn't over tighten any of these other screws that we installed previously or the board won't move at all. So let me just double check. Yeah, that one was a little tight. Make sure all these are backed off. We don't want any of them tight right now, or it will limit our movement of the board as needed for proper screw alignment. This is all pretty basic stuff, and it doesn't just apply to motherboards, but anything that takes multiple screws that you might be assembling or reassembling. It's so close. Kind of feel like there's still an alignment issue, but the screw might just fix it. Because we're not in one of those corners, the electric driver just might be what it takes. Although you shouldn't have to do this. Should go in easy. There it goes. Once it caught, it shifted the board for me. As long as we're really close, that's okay. But if you're looking at half a hole, you're way too far off. You need to realign that board or you're going to strip it out or potentially even crack the motherboard too. Yep, there's one. That's the one we just did. That's the third one on the top. I'm just tightening them down now. Middle at the back of the case. Middle at the front of the case. The screw closest to you guys on the bottom row. Oops. Middle screw on the bottom row. And finally, the bottom corner. That motherboard is now properly installed. Now, for me to get the radiator installed, it's going to be a lot easier for me to go ahead and remove the water block right now. Now, it's not a big deal to wipe the thermal compound and reapply it if you just feel like that's what you want to do. I'm just trying to avoid unnecessary work that won't benefit me. But the thermal compound can get all over everything. And if you're worried about getting it on your clothes or staining any of your furniture, just wipe it off and reapply it. But that's a completely different reason than thinking you're going to make your system run cooler. There we go. So these are the thumb screws that hold the water block down. And again, it's always safe to use an electric driver for removing screws. It's when we're putting them on, we want to be very careful. And if you're not 100% confident with your electric driver, best to turn those by hand. Now, when we look at the CPU, now I can take this out. Oh, I have to unplug it from the board, don't I? One of the things you'll find is the thermal compound is not evenly spread on the bottom of the block or on the bottom of the CPU. The CPU has a big bald spot right in the middle. What does that remind me of? But it's right there in the middle of the block. So when we put this right back on exactly as it was, it fills and you get 100% coverage just as it was before. Don't let that fool you. Doesn't mean you don't have full coverage. You do. Half of it's stuck to the block, half of it's on the CPU. And if we put it in the same orientation, those holes and those gaps and fills line up right back perfectly. So there is no loss of thermal material. Now, if you were to rotate the block and put it on in a different orientation, you might be putting too much thermal compound on where there already was some before on the CPU, and then the bald spot still stays bald. And the reason I've taken this off is I want to turn these fans around. I'm happy with the fans being on this side, but I need these cables to come out this side. I don't want to see them. I want these cables, which are fully visible from the front of this case, I want the cables to be at the back where I can route them through these cable holes and it'll be a much cleaner look. It has no impact on how well this works or what it's going to sound like. It's not even going to change the visual of it with regards to the RGB lighting versus putting the fans on the other side or flipping the fans the opposite direction to reverse the airflow. Defeats the whole point of the RGB, and you might as well just not spend the extra. If you care more about, you really want your airflow to go front to back, don't put an RGB system in or buy the additional cost reverse blade fans. There's every problem that money can fix is available when you deal with this kind of stuff. So what I'm doing is I'm sacrificing the regular airflow for a reverse airflow because these are the parts I have and I don't want to spend any money on it. And it's going to perform probably cooler than most other 10900K systems because this, when we tested it, performed mind-blowingly well. So we obviously have a very good pairing with this cooler and that CPU that we never even get close to having what I would define as hot temperatures at 85. We don't even hit that. I don't think we break the 70s with this under an intense Cinebench load. So I'm very happy with that. And so just by rotating these fans 90 degrees, just turn them around. Well, I guess that's not 90, it's 180 degrees. We just want these cables on this side so it'll look better. No sacrifice in performance. But there you have the Why is this wobbling? Is that missing a foot? What's going on? Oh, this is the bag of screws. That went to the other side of the radiator. I was keeping it with the radiator. And we will need these because we will secure the other side of the radiator right up here to the front. Now, before I go any further, because I've not been paying much attention to the chat room, let's see what's on your mind today. Ajin Guy joins us and says hello. Ego the Sniper says the fan in the back is off center. That's how they shipped it from the factory. In fact, if you look at a lot of cases that come pre-installed with fans in the rear, they usually put the fan towards the bottom. That's pretty normal. Most people won't see the back of this, but you do have adjustments here. There's a big slot, and you can slide the fan up and down about an inch to your personal requirements. That's easily adjustable, but that's standard factory installation. And according to the factory, that's the way it's supposed to go. It didn't slide, it's not loose. That was how the people at the factory were instructed to assemble these. Again, that would be a conversation that would never happen in a business environment. No one would ever say anything to you about that. And if anybody did, they would likely, they find out that you're doing jobs based on aesthetics. It's not a safety concern. Yeah, you're probably going to get a meeting with the boss. Not what they pay you for. So there are only things you hear from consumers that only exist in the world of consumers. And then on the bigger, much, much bigger world of business, there are policies and practices that are mostly, they're similar from one business to another. They vary, but they're very similar. And I'm personally slightly amused by what consumers care about when it comes to their personal rigs, because it's so over the top. It's no longer about the computer's performance, reliability, security. It's about, do I have the lights right? And that's fine. It's not wrong. It's just slightly humorous to me, because you could lose your job for that in the real world of business. Rule in the chat wants to know, what cooler are we using? When we took this motherboard and cooler out, it was in the AHT600, which is like an Apache helicopter inspired case made by Thermaltake. And we paired that with a Thermaltake power supply and a Thermaltake cooler. So you see the two T's next to each other all over these fans, and on the block, that stands for Thermaltake. It is their logo. They're a fairly well-known company in PC case and cooling manufacturing, and have been around for many decades. And we've certainly featured them here on this channel a couple of times. I don't have real strong feelings one way or the other with regards to how good they are. They're good. They're not my favorite, and they're not a brand I avoid. They seem to have very good value for the money, and I don't really have anything to complain about, but they're also nothing to brag about. They're just sort of good value. News fan says he's looking for an air cooler. Do we have a suggestion for a 14th gen CPU? Well, there's only about 14 different 14th gen CPUs, just as you might be buying a car that might come with a 4-cylinder, a 6-cylinder, a 6-cylinder turbo, an 8-cylinder. It could be a twin turbo. It could be, like, we'd have to know specifically which 14th gen CPU are you considering. And if you're going to go with an air cooler, it may cover up any RGB RAM, and some RGB RAM is too tall for some air coolers. So yeah, if you can be specific with us, we can be specific with you. And if you're vague with us, well, we can only be vague in return. Doesn't mean we're not trying to help. We just don't fully have all the information to give you the answer specifically that you want without the additional information. And of course, watch the chat room for suggestions, because a lot of their suggestions are better than mine, quite frankly. But we do appreciate your question. We do encourage you to ask questions. And please do be specific as much as possible so we can get to that answer more quickly. Kevin says, I missed his question. Unfortunately, Kevin, the chat moves very quickly. For the effort you put in typing that I missed your question doesn't help me. I don't know where your question is. You'd have to republish your question. You can copy and paste it while you have my attention, rather than asking me to dig and sift through the past chat trying to locate your specific question. You will need to meet me halfway on that, and I will be happy to answer it. Okay? We're not intentionally ignoring anybody. I'm not going to go through and sift through. For all the effort it took you to type that I missed your question, you could have just copied and pasted the question again. Would have been a lot easier, and all of this exposition I'm giving you right now would have been the answer to your question. And now, as I continue to work, I might miss it again. So you've got to strike, while we're looking, and we'll do what we can. And remember, watch the chat room for answers too, because we have such a great community here, and many of them have been watching this channel for years, and many of them understand exactly what my suggestion is going to be. They can tell you what I'm going to say because I'm pretty consistent. And furthermore, they may even have improvements on my suggestions, and quite often they do, that are even better than my suggestions. So, don't dismiss any offered answers here in our chat room. There's Mortant saying, can we get some thumbs up for CareyHolzman? Hey, look, thank you, Mortant, if you do like the video, a lot of people forget to hit the thumbs up unless you remind them to. So for the sake of, saying what every YouTube content creator makes, be sure and like and subscribe. And of course, turn the notifications on by hitting the bell and choosing what kind of notifications you want. Do you want to be alerted anytime I go live, or only sometimes? Or not at all? Those are your three options. By default, you're only going to get some notifications. You have to change it yourself to get all notifications from my channel. And you need to do that for every single channel you subscribe to. Kevin's question, I guess, is what is better, replace the CPU or replace the board? Well, again, without knowing the context of your question, I don't know what the problem is you're trying to solve. So instead of asking me, should I change the front brakes or the rear brakes, I'd like to understand why you're changing the brakes at all. What's the problem you're trying to solve? And then from there, we can work forward with giving you some guidance, some tips. But I don't know what you're trying to achieve. So in some cases, the answer may be the board. In other cases, the CPU. I don't know. Without that additional information, it's just too vague. He says it looks like his CPU socket is loose. What does that even... So the CPU socket being loose, what are you calling the CPU socket? The CPU socket is soldered onto the board. It's not possible for it to be loose. The socket frame that surrounds it, the internal locking mechanism, has screws on the back, which actually has screws on the front of it. On Intel, the screws are right on each corner. Torx screws. You can also buy a socket frame for about $10 from Thermalright, but I don't know what you mean. I don't know what a loose. I've never seen a loose. I think what you're trying to explain isn't using the right verbiage. Sometimes what we need to do is have a customer show us a picture or a video of what they're describing so we can better understand it. But I don't know what a loose socket is. I mean, if anybody in the chat has an idea, I don't know. Kevin says his CPU comes out when you remove the cooler. That's pretty standard on AMD CPUs like socket AM4. That's because you didn't heat the thermal compound up before you remove this cooler, and so the thermal compound is dried like a glue when it's cold. And then when you lifted up the cooler, what you should have done is twisted it. You've removed it incorrectly, and on that chip, it pulls the chip right out of the socket. That doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with the socket at all. Christian wants to know AMD or Intel, whichever you prefer. They're both excellent choices. Yeah, with AMD CPUs, you don't pull straight up on the cooler. If you do that, you're doing it wrong. It's going to result in you yanking forcefully removing the CPU from its socket, and that can damage the CPU. It typically doesn't damage the socket at all. Kevin says it's a socket AM4 and it was repasted, which is what started the problem. So why did you repaste it? What was the problem you were having that you decided to do that? You see, we have to go so far back. You're asking a question way up here, and we're trying to figure out, how did you get here? What is it we're trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And we're still trying to get that information from you. So again, we're happy to help, but we have to understand the scenario in order to understand the situation. He says it was overheating. So how do you determine it's overheating? Where did you come to that conclusion? Was the computer shutting off? Was it blue screening? Were you just watching some YouTube video that showed you some software that just convinced you that you had a problem when you didn't? Was there a real, actual problem that you were trying to solve? And if so, I'd like to know what the problem was, not what the... I don't want to know it was overheating. That's not useful information for me. I need to know what was the symptom you were trying to resolve, right? What was, if it was overheating, what was that causing the system to do that you were trying to correct that you have correlated to heat? So we have to keep pulling this information. It's like interrogating somebody. What was the problem you were trying to solve? He says temps were above normal. I don't know what that means. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what you define as normal. What I need to know is, was the system not performing correctly? When you set out to run a piece of software or play a game, did it not complete the task? Did it fail at that task? That's all I want to know. Because if it, he says idle was 75 degrees. That's normal on an AMD chip, especially on the 9000 series chips, which I realize are AM5. Those will run at 95, and AMD says that's normal. There's no problem to fix there. So it doesn't sound like you were having any problem at all. It sounds like you got some information online that you deemed to be, this is like going to WebMD and now you think you have a disease. You were never sick, but now you started taking medicine you didn't need to take, which has now made you sick. That's what it sounds like you've just done. There was nothing wrong with the computer. You were experiencing no issues. I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding you, this is what you're telling us in the chat room. He says the idle before used to be 25 and one day it hit 75. That's likely caused by a BIOS update that has changed the voltages and that you can go in and reset that. It's not typically caused by a cooler that was one day working and another day wasn't. So this idea that you're fixing it with thermal paste means you were going about the fix completely the wrong way. So now you've got a higher temperature than what you were seeing before, and you decide to brute force that by disassembly and repasting, which yanks your CPU out of the socket, which now has you convinced your socket is loose, which it probably isn't. And all of this because of a misunderstanding, just fundamentally misunderstanding the correct procedure on how to resolve that. And you know, we're here to help you so you don't have to go through this very painful learning curve of trying to resolve it on your own, right? When we understand what it is you're trying to fix, we can guide you, at least it's our intention, in a way that is much safer. In other words, you're not going to risk damaging the CPU by going into the BIOS and checking those voltages and reducing them back down to where they should be, making sure that your fan curves are set correctly. And typically a BIOS update is what causes that. So we do have a free forum, by the way, over at CareyHolzman.boards.net. And you're welcome to join us there, create a free account. And that's encouraging everybody to post their experiences, to ask for help, and allow the community to assist. Because some of these problems could be a one-on-one back and forth for 2 or 3 hours, which we can't dedicate and allow one person to monopolize a show for that. If it's a quick question and a quick answer, or in the range of that, we're certainly glad to help. But the minute we start getting into levels like this, it's like, okay, we need to take that offline, because we got to rewind this and we got to get a lot more information. Unfortunately, this, in my opinion, was approached in a completely wrong way, and it caused damage where there wasn't any, and potentially now there is some, and to the extent of which would require a lot more time and investigation. So if that leads us back to, is it better to replace the motherboard or the CPU? Well, I still don't understand what was causing the heat problem. It wasn't your thermal paste. It wasn't like one day is just gonna, it doesn't work like that. So what was it? Likely a BIOS update. And is it better than to replace the CPU with a motherboard? I mean, if you rip the CPU out of the socket, probably the motherboard. But it probably doesn't need to be replaced. Probably neither one of them needs to be replaced. And if you hadn't messed with it, it wouldn't be as bad as it is now. But if you understand when you're messing around with it that you're getting a learning experience, all the power to you, right? But if you want to avoid the anxiety, the panic, or spending more money to replace parts that wouldn't have needed to be replaced, you are certainly welcome to come into our community and ask for guidance on that. And we're more than happy to help in the best way that we can with the information that you provide us. But I really feel like you kind of went at that in a very brute force method that should have been sort of the last thing you did. There's so many other things to check with your keyboard and mouse, not even having to open the system. That probably should have been done first. And that ship has sailed. But for the benefit of everybody else, we can all learn from your experience to understand, there's people that want to figure it out on their own, and I respect that. And then there's people who, in that process, create a different problem. And now you haven't not only not solved your initial problem, you've made it worse and maybe damaged the CPU socket, according to you. We certainly, when we help people online, our intent is to help them avoid exactly what you've done. However, what's done is done, right? So now the question is, where do we go from here? And I think the forum would be a great place for you to go regarding how much more there is to the story. And we'd be happy to help you there. And we certainly appreciate you hanging out with us. And I'm sure there are some suggestions from our community as well that you should be watching for. So let me turn these fans around right quick. This should only take a minute. I do love interacting with you guys, and again, I'm not looking to point blame or make anybody feel bad. I'm just trying to get to understanding cause and effect and how we can avoid it in the future, and how we move forward confidently without repeating the past. That's all. My glasses. Now, these cables have all been zip tied together, and I really don't want to redo that. I'm hoping I can just turn them around without having to redo my cable management. Now you see these long screws, these are typically used when you're going from a fan into a radiator, which is weird that the case included those. It's really strange. The other thing to consider also is if I even want these cables managed like that, because I have these holes right through here that we can route the cables through individually instead of routing them as, because in the Apache build, we didn't really have any cable management built into that case. So I was trying to keep everything together and kind of tucked away, but you could still really see it, So now I'm having some other thoughts on just how important it is to keep that cable management now. But definitely want to turn these fans 180 degrees. We're going to keep them oriented with the same side up. And you can see it's so tight because I'm so thorough in my cable management. And that's why I don't show typically the cable management, because it will change depending on what case and what parts you have. I rarely do cable management the same twice. So there's really nothing to learn by showing you the cable management process other than whatever parts you've got in whatever case you have, make it look whatever looks good to you. That's it. And rarely are two the same unless we're building with the exact same parts in the exact same case. That almost never happens here. Now, there was a while where we were working with a lot of Corsair 200R cases. And of course, the cable management still varied a little bit depending on how much excess we had on the power supply, which power supply we were using, and then how many things we were plugging into the power supply. Just bumped my keyboard. So it's not an exact science. It's not like a math problem. It's really a personal preference. And of course, the variables and the variety of parts that you're using and what case you're putting it in will vary, as it should, resulting in a custom cable management job. Now, some cases, like this NZXT, they give us some predefined cable management areas, and that may be all you need. And that makes cable management really easy, and you can tell from the smile on my face, I like that. I did not get into this business to manage cables or to install plumbing. You know, I'm a computer tech, got in it to work on tech, to work on operating systems and RAM and motherboards and hardware. I did not get into this to hook up liquid cooling and RGB lighting. And so, you know, I have sort of gone along with it to stay in business, but for home users only. Businesses, again, this is nothing businesses do. Nothing big businesses do anyway. So I can turn this like so. And then the question is, do I want my cable coming out right there? Or do I want my cable coming out down here? Well, if that's going to be the bottom, that first hole is more towards the top, or more along right around this area. Yeah, there's no cable management hole down there. So that will get us closer to the hole there. And now these I want to be very cautious with tightening on the electric screwdriver. The metal that's used on a radiator, even on a car radiator or an air conditioning coil, is very soft metal. Barely touch it, it'll bend. So we don't want to over tighten these screws. The rubber around these fans exists. See, that's not going in straight. That's not good. The rubber exists to absorb vibrational noise. And if you over tighten the screws, not only does it strip out potentially the soft metal, but when you start seeing that rubber bend in, you're losing the elasticity of the rubber that's there to absorb the vibration, the noises, and then the noises become more prominent as a result. So these screws should not be tight. They should simply be firm. How do you know the difference? Ooh, that does not want to go in there at all. Yeah, there must have been a burr or something in there. Once you see the rubber start to bend in underneath the screw, that's it. And you might say, yeah, but the screw's still pretty loose. That's right. That's exactly right. As long as the screw's not being vibrated really hard against a surface, it's not going to vibrate itself out. So long as you allow that rubber to remain flexible. What's the word I'm looking for? To have some play in it, some flex to it. So even that might be a little bit tight. Back that off a little bit. We're looking for that rubber to be bent in. If that's bent in, just taking it a little too far. Now a little tiny indentation, that's fine. But the minute, the more it indents, the more of the elasticity, that's the word, you're removing. And then of course the vibrational, what's the word I want? Absorption is reduced. So the irony is, the tighter the screw is, the more likely it will back itself out through vibration. because you've lost the vibration absorption by over tightening it. Plus, you may also deal with more noise. So a lot of people have it in their heads that tight screws are better. Depends what we're talking about. On a water block, you want them tight and you want them even. On a radiator fan, anytime you have these rubber dampeners, you want to make sure those rubber dampeners are not so, the screws aren't so tight that it's bending them inwards or you over tightened. It's very simple. What did I do here? Let's see. They've woven themselves together. Now this one I think should come out this side. That'll keep these two together through that same management hole right there. That's what I think. Although the other management hole is right there. I think I could go either way with this one. And then this one will share the top hole, which is right up here. And this one can share either the top one or the middle one here towards the bottom. One of them is going to share with the other, and I don't think there's a right or wrong. Sometimes you just got to exercise the best judgment. And you might choose differently than I did, and you wouldn't be wrong. Of course, neither would I. It's another thing I really like about this industry is the approach I take to get me to the end result. Can be whatever approach I want it to be, and your approach can be whatever you want it to be. And as long as we have met our customers' expectation for time and money, customers happy, that is the only measure that matters. Anybody else's opinion who isn't involved and they're just a spectator, they're just making noise. It doesn't matter. It's just staticky noise. Not helpful to anybody. Now, the people who actually do it and take responsibility and accountability for the quality of the work, what they charge and how long it takes them, will use whatever approach they deem appropriate. So this one I said, it's going to go this way. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. Steve Dodd renews membership. He's now a member for 27 months. Right on, Steve. Thank you for renewing your membership and being a member here over 2 years. Yeah, that one must have been over tightened because I see the rubber starting to separate around the hole. Yeah, this one too. That wouldn't happen if these weren't over tightened, so I over tightened them. If I over tightened them even more, they would probably tear this in half. So at least I didn't do that. It's a bit unnatural for most of us to leave screws so loose. I'm here to reassure you, for these kind of fans that have these rubber dampeners, they don't go tight. See that rubber dip down? That one looks like it's dipping down a little too much. We're going to back that off. These will not vibrate loose unless you over tighten them. I love the irony of that. Now, if I lay this back down, when I put this in this time, we can feed these lines, and they did give us very long cables, which is weird. But Thermaltake, in their fairness, they do make some very tall cases where those cables might actually need to be that long. But this is not a Thermaltake case, and as a result, the cable management will need to accommodate for the differences in manufacturing from NZXT to from Thermaltake to NZXT. Well, that's the top one. That one doesn't go there. You know what? I think I'm going to do it this way first. I think we're going to set this up like so. We'll put that one there. Remember, we need to run this through now because the radiator is going to block those holes once this is seated. And we also want to avoid any tangling. So if this is going to go this direction, we want this cable and this cable through this other hole right here. So that's our middle fan. Just like that. And then finally, the last fan, that's, remember I said they're going to share a hole. So that'll go right here. And I do try to avoid the cables weaving. Keep them so they're on their own path. And they won't interfere with the path of the other cables. And that'll make your cable management a lot easier. We just start pulling the slack through. As I set the radiator in, we should be able to get it right up against the motherboard tray. If I did this right. I feel like something's fighting me here. Oh, there it goes. And now we can use these screws that I set aside in a Ziploc. Where did I put the Ziploc? I just had it. Right here. Okay, now I need a third hand. Let's just see how talented I am or I am not. At this point, I think we'll set this down so I'm not trying to fight gravity here. Go with the flow. That will free up my hands. So now I can get these screws out. Put those right there. We'll spin this around so as I can seize it. Now again, these need to be very shallow screws. You don't want to just find whatever screws are laying around. You want to use the screws that came with the radiator. It's a soft metal. You'll strip it out, and you can go in too deep and have a leak, and then it's pretty much throwaway time. There's no repairing those. So what I'm looking for is this right here, which I don't know why I'm looking in the drawer. And we're just going to start with one corner. Pick this up and figure out where's the best alignment going to be. Looks like right there. Okay, we got one corner. Now if I do the opposite corner, then all the other screws are there for support. But as far as alignment goes, these two opposite corners will keep us aligned. Now you see that screw it's just not going in all the way. Now that either means the screw isn't straight, or there's a burr in the thread, or the angle I'm on is causing the screw to not be centered. So I'm going to use my manual screwdriver. That's why I have a very low torque setting on my driver. See if I can't figure out if we're sideways or if we're straight on and it's a burr. And we need to work that through gently where we risk tearing the threads. Okay, we're good. Phew. Don't over tighten these screws. So with those two screws in place, that's how our radiator is going to be. This is the bottom of the case. This is the front. This is the top. In case you lost your orientation. And now it doesn't matter what order we put the rest of these in. Mostly these aren't really needed, to be honest. I mean, if you put two at the bottom and two at the top, you're probably fine. There is a potential for bowing in the center, but mostly these holes exist because you could put fans on the other side. And each fan takes 4 screws. This holds 3 fans. That's 12 holes. So you have these 12 additional screws that are there as anchors that aren't really needed, but it also doesn't hurt. Just put them in. You don't have to worry about losing them in case you need them for some change in the future. They'll be right in the radiator where they belong. Again, I have a very low torque setting on the driver. It auto shuts off when I hit a torque of just 3. Then I can go back with the screwdriver. And the order doesn't matter. We just want to make sure these are... Don't over tighten them. They want to... Once they stop turning, you might just nudge them just a little teeny bit. That's it. We're good. Again, they're not going to come loose. And having 12 screws hold this in is way over the top, but standard practice for a 3-fan radiator at 4 screws per fan. Knowing that the option of adding fans to both sides is we could have 6 fans making a radiator sandwich, which is ridiculous and dumb and a complete waste of money in my opinion. But don't let me tell you how to spend your money. You know, what do I know? Now we can put the radiator, or the water block rather, back onto the cooler. And as I mentioned, without smearing or smudging or losing any thermal material from the top of the CPU or the bottom of the heatsink, it'll just realign back to just the way it was when we took it off. What's interesting to me is this cooler wants to go on sideways, meaning the Thermaltake logo would be horizontal instead of vertical. Normally, the radiator hoses or the water pump hoses, they go right towards the ram. This design wants those hoses at the bottom. And if we rotate this, we should be able to achieve that aesthetic look. If it didn't have writing on it, honestly, I would have put the hoses towards the ram. I'm making an exception here for aesthetic purposes, but it will not affect the system in any way with regards to cooling, stability, reliability, none of that. It's purely aesthetic. Now, one of the other things I'm noticing are these coolant lines appear to be twisted. And it looks like no matter how I put this on, but let me just verify. It looks like they're going to twist one way or the other. If I put it on sideways with the hoses facing the ram, it does not twist. They're not overlapping each other. I wonder if it's possible for me to rotate the Thermaltake logo. On some coolers, you can rotate the tops where they're lit up and have a logo. And some you cannot. It's logically, it should be going in. It should be going in where we're not twisting the hoses. There does not appear to be a way to install this. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's made it worse. Go the other way. One way or the other, it's just not going to look right. If I put it with the Thermaltake logo facing upright, the hoses do sort of overlap each other. If I put it with the Thermaltake logo sideways, then the hoses run individually side by side instead of one on top of the other one. This is more of a visual concern, again, than a performance concern. I really want that Thermaltake logo upright because we have a glass panel and people are going to see it. It's a silly reason for adjusting an installation method, but that's what building has become when you deal with liquid cooling and RGB, which again, not in the corporate world. It's just not a thing. This only exists for home users. I'll tell you the other thing I think is a little weird is there's a USB cable that will run, this is a really long cable, it'll run behind the motherboard and back up to the underside of the board behind the case. And then the CPU power cable also runs up to the top of the motherboard, which it should be, it shouldn't be coming out. Let me show you what I'm talking about because you can't see it. These two cables right here, ideally for cable management purposes, they should be coming out up here. because we have to plug one in here and go out this management hole up here. So to run them the additional few inches from the bottom makes them more visible and unsightly, and it also is a little sloppy. So if I turn this the way I want to put it in, which is the hoses at the RAM, which most liquid coolers go in that way on Intel systems, then these cables will be at this corner, and now we're only that far away from where we need to go instead of that far away, and that minimizes cable clutter in the way that it looks. On the other hand, our Thermaltake logo, which says Thermaltake right here, will be facing sideways. And now that I've looked at it, and I have to make a choice, a design choice, ooh, this is a tough choice to make. First of all, it's not that big of a deal to see a couple inches of cable, but it's also not big of a deal to see the logo sideways. The tech in me wants to put the radiator or the water block on the same way I do it all the time, which is the hoses towards the RAM. That's what the technical side of me wants. The emotional side of me wants that logo right side up. And if you know me, you know I'm going to choose the technical side, right? I'm going to dismiss the emotional side. So now the question is, if we're rotating this block from how we took it off, was it installed with the hoses down or was it installed with the hoses towards the RAM? Because if we're going to rotate this 90 degrees, then we need to reapply our thermal compound. And based on what I'm seeing a vertical spot here that matches a vertical spot on the CPU. That implies this was installed with the Thermaltake logo facing this way, right? And on the Apache build, I obviously made a different choice that I'm making right now. For some reason, I don't know. Maybe because of because the radiator was mounted flat next to the motherboard instead of sideways beside the motherboard, it's changing the tension on the hoses. Maybe that's the difference. Let me set this aside. Let's have a little fun. What would you do? Would you want forget the thermal compound, that's nothing either way, doesn't matter. Would you rather have the Thermaltake logo right side up? Because it doesn't appear there's any way to turn it. As far as I can tell, that does not turn. It won't matter which way we put this bracket on, it's always going to be the same, no matter, it's not like we just turn the bracket. That doesn't make any difference. It's an issue of the hoses to the radiator, with the hoses coming out the bottom instead of coming out the side as they should, with relation to the logo being upright. These are home user problems. These are not corporate IT issues. They are unique only to enthusiasts. Just to be clear, not that there's anything wrong with it, but if you deal with corporate all the time, I'm telling you this is weird when you look at it from that perspective. When you look at it from a home user's perspective, you might think the corporate side of it's weird, except corporate can tell you why. And it has nothing to do with their feelings. It has to do with profit. Let's see, what do you guys think? There are no wrong answers. There are only preferences. I think I'll take these fan screws and we'll save these. That with the case. So the next owner of this will have them if they ever need them. David Graham said it doesn't matter to him one way or the other. Well, you know what? That's a valid answer too. Cables and wires normal, turn the logo. I don't, first of all, I would love to turn the logo. A lot of water blocks do have a rotatable top. It does not appear to be an option on this model. But if you have a link that shows how to turn that, please share it with me. Because I don't want to have to disassemble the pump assembly to get the logo that's way over the top. Some CPU coolers, water block coolers, will have a screen, and then when you load the software, you can rotate the image on the screen, so it doesn't matter what orientation you put the block on. This is old school. This is about 4 years old, and you know, I think they still had screens on coolers, but they were a lot more money. In fact, they still are. They're between $200 to $400 if you want the screen. So this is just etched out, and it lights up with LEDs behind it. And this does not turn. And I don't see a seam on it at all for that to even be a consideration. It appears fixed in place. Now, I have seen marketing photos of Thermaltake coolers from Thermaltake installed sideways, which I thought is weird, right? That their own marketing company shows a photo of the cooler installed what I would call the right way, but with the Thermaltake logo, which is usually very, very important to a company, that is proudly displayed upright and proper, to be sideways. Just puzzling why they made that decision. And the minute they saw that, why they wouldn't have corrected it in manufacturing. Or maybe they did and I just don't know. But that's not common to do that way. Rick Lake said he would have this, he'd say the logo sideways. Scott says logo sideways. So isn't that interesting, right? A situation you would never encounter in professional IT work or corporate America is something that a regular home user might struggle with. And it's a non-issue. It's completely created through the additional spending of unnecessary components with unnecessary lighting that lights up a logo that if you're finicky and picky and you want everything to be just right, you're going to have to sacrifice either your cabling or the logo, one or the other, or return the product and buy something else. Again, not an option in a business. They got business to do. They don't have time for that. Mark Leonoso says, keep the customer happy. And to be clear, there's no customer here. We're just doing this for the channel. We do have a goal to sell this. So a customer could complain about it, but right now there's no customer. But let's see what you say here. Have the logo facing forward. I'm sure the customer will be confident with the cable management. Yeah, you're probably not wrong. That additional couple of inches of cabling that will be exposed probably won't be seen because of the smoky glass. This is a smoked glass, right? This isn't a perfectly clear. If the glass is perfectly clear, then that might change things. Some cases, the glass is tinted. Other cases, the glass is not tinted. The tinted glass does a much better job at hiding, you know, especially if they're dark cables against a dark motherboard against a dark case. Even if there's an LED right next to them lighting that area up, the tinted glass still more or less mutes that visual distraction. Still looking to see if there's any other suggestions here. David Graham contributed $2. He said, your video's late, no fair. Well, better late than never, right? I was debating whether or not to go on later than normal. We are still having renovations done here, and during the day there's a lot of hammering and sawing and noises. And I do try to find a way to find other ways to provide content. If the channel goes too silent for too long, I start losing viewers. So I'm trying, and by the way, the work isn't doing itself. So while I'm not making any videos, I could work at night and not film it, but that means you don't even get to share any content. It means I'm just here building computers by myself. I'd much rather build these on camera, even if it means I have to start late. Otherwise, I get so far behind in work, waiting until I can broadcast, that it can make me a bit stressed out. So it's not normal for us to go this late, but we're also not, it's not normal for us to renovate a room. There are other rooms that have to be renovated. However, we can't afford to do them all at once. So we'll do this one. We'll take a little break. Things will get back to normal. We'll do the next one. We're going to be back to the hammering and demoing and reassembling until it all gets done, which, you know, at this rate, probably be a year or two. The rooms aren't going anywhere. But I don't know the pace at which we're going to get it done financially and availability of the worker. So we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, doing the best I can. Sandra says, I'll save this to watch later tonight. There you go. Yeah, this will be available after it airs, so you can watch it at your convenience. We just love having the live interaction. So, of course, when it airs later, as a replay, you'll be able to leave comments, but you won't be able to interact with us in live chat. David Graham says, the noise is okay, we don't mind. It's not okay. It can be very difficult for me to focus on what I'm doing when there's hammering and banging and sawing, and sometimes they need to ask me if I want something. Maybe they're going to paint. Which color paint did you want? And they see me on camera, they don't want to bother me. They're going to interrupt a broadcast and say, you know, have a worker say, hey, did you want this paint or did you want this paint? But if I'm not obviously engaged, they'll ask. And this can prevent any mistakes from happening that then require a redo. So it's just a lot more to it. But the noise is the primary concern. It's very hard for me to focus when there's just random banging for no apparent reason, right? I don't see it coming. It's just a surprise every time. What's going on? So I appreciate your super chats, and hang with us. It'll be done soon enough. We're very close. In the meantime, sideways logo, upright logo. If I keep it upright, I don't have to redo the thermal compound. The logo stays upright. We have a couple inches of cables that we have to hide, which we're not able to. They just run alongside of the cooler, or they run alongside of the RAM, essentially between the RAM and pump. And we just kind of tighten them up so that they're more or less trying to blend in as best we can with the motherboard, but are otherwise fully visible. If we turn it sideways, the hoses don't overlap. It's a cleaner look. The cables are cleaner. We will have to reapply thermal compound, but the logo will be sideways. Tim Sowell contributed a $20 super chat. I'm sorry, Tim, I just saw that now. He says, thanks for all you do. I listen to you at work all the time on Fridays. Well, thanks, Tim, and thank you for supporting the channel. Wonder if I missed anything else in that regard. Let me go over here. No, I think I got everybody. Thanks. Thank you, all of you. Mark wants to know, Carey, the cumulative update keeps failing on my Acer Predator desktop. What could cause that? Well, I need to know, is it Windows 10 or Windows 11? And I need to know the knowledge base or the KB number of the update. And then from there, we'd have a better understanding of which update on which operating system. And then with that, I can help you out. Scott thinks we should put the water pump in sideways because the hoses and the wires would look cleaner. I do agree. Hey, Mara?
Tommy?
Yeah.
What's up?
I'm having a dilemma, having an existential crisis.
With the cooler
Yeah.
position?
Yeah.
Okay.
What would Mara do?
And
Log.
So I need a visual.
I can give you visuals. Okay. So this pump was on the Apache with the hoses down. This Thermaltake logo does not rotate. But when I put it here, do you see where these wires are coming out?
Yes.
These wires would have to run up beside the pump, between the RAM and the pump, up to the top, which would make them fully visible. But the logo will be upright. And the hoses, one will overlap the other, since the cooler is now facing the front instead of being aligned in the back beside the board as it was in the Apache helicopter. Normally, the way pumps go on is you put the RAM, or the hoses rather, towards the RAM so that the wires coming out of this corner are closer to where they're going to run. But because this top does not rotate, it means the logo is going to be sideways, which will also be very visible through the glass. Not only is the logo sideways, but even the writing is sideways.
Yeah,
but that's how it, so this is how it should have gone on. That's normal. And you see the way the hoses look right now?
And they look better like
Okay, and if I turn it so the logo's upright, then not only are these cables going to be more visible, they have to run a further distance, but the hoses overlap.
No, I don't like it.
So it's got to be.
Frankly, it does.
So you mean install it the right way, technically, right? Because the emotional side says get the logo straight.
No.
The technical side says mount it clean.
No, because when you turn it like that, so I'm big on visual flow.
Yeah.
And it doesn't flow with showing as.
Isn't that an odd choice for Thermaltake to put their logo on 90 degrees off center? I mean, you know.
It's a little, but you know what? While it is a little, I guess, unusual, I think it kind of makes sense, because if they don't know which case or which board you're going to use, so
almost universally, universally, the hoses go towards the RAM. So they can kind of predict that's the way most.
Yeah.
And shouldn't that be the default?
Some PCs you can tilt them, right? You can put them on a different side.
But then wouldn't you make the center rotatable?
Well, but remember, this is older too.
It is older.
It is older. So.
But they didn't have. I mean, it's on a rotating table. I know we had the technology.
I mean, obviously, in the Apache was a different story, but here, this is this case of everything is, for the most part, different, at least in terms of the housing that it's now put in. So for here, though, I do think the thermal logo has.
Would you bring me a paper towel so I can, because the thermal compound, if I was going to put it on the way it came off, I can leave the thermal compound alone. But if I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, then I'm going to have a bunch of thermal compound on one side of it and none on the other. So, but it's not a big deal. I was just trying to be lazy.
Well,
I work much harder trying to be lazy.
It'll still look good either way. For me, in a visual perspective and the flow, I would like to see less cables and what else.
I know I've seen some photos at Amazon of Thermaltake cases with the Thermaltake cooler sideways.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can find any, but if you'd grab me a paper towel, I'd appreciate it. Now clean this thermal compound up so we can get this mounted and move on. These are some weird things that are obstacles in the path of building. Let's do Thermaltake. I'll just type in ACE. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me see some of these marketing photos. This one, they've got a marketing photo here that shows the hoses going the opposite side of the RAM. And they clearly did that because the hoses would not then go over the top of the RAM, right? And they obviously had enough hose to be able to do that on whatever radiator they used here, which is clearly a Thermaltake product, and the logo is correct. It's right side up. We go back, take a look here. Click on this case. Let's see what it looks like in the marketing photos. These hoses also appear to go, no, they're 90 degrees away from the RAM. So the other marketing photo, Thermaltake put the hoses at the opposite side of the RAM. On this marketing photo, the hoses are coming out of the bottom. But also, this is, I don't believe this is an image, but a screen. And of course, the screen can be rotated in software. So we'd have to find the same cooler to see some examples of how Thermaltake marketed that. Did I look at this one already? No. See, that's a screen. And those hoses are coming out of the bottom. They're not coming from the side. If you look at anybody else's coolers, we go up here and type in, let's do Leon Lee AIO, you'll probably see the hoses between the block and the RAM in most cases, right? With a screen default, assuming that's the installation position. Even if there's no screen, even if it's RGB, you always see the hoses to the right. This one's different, but let's take a closer look. This is not installed, so that doesn't really tell us anything when it's not installed. Oh, it kind of does. It implies, because of the way that they've got these hose combs, that the hoses are intended to be at the top of the block instead of the left, right, or bottom, which is the opposite of it. That is unique in what we've looked at so far, but that's also a very unique cooler. So, what is the right way? Here's an expensive cooler, nearly $200. They show it installed. They do show the hoses on the right, even when it's just an LED top where there's no logo. It's still the default of being on the right. And I think, well, there's no set industry standard. Most of the time you're going to find hoses on the right between the block and the RAM. And there's always going to be exceptions, right, depending on the motherboard and the case. But that's normally the default, and you would think the orientation of the top, if there is a logo, would default to that common orientation. Apparently, Thermaltake disagrees with me. Oh, what a bizarre issue to have. Tim Sowell says, sideways. David Graham with a $2 super chat says, my niece is having a baby today. Wish her luck. Well, congratulations to her. Hopefully, pun intended, everything comes out okay. I don't see a response yet from Mark Gaines regarding the update. Mortant said, the question is, Carey, what would you do? I don't know. I mean, I'm very capable in installing this cooler multiple ways. It's all within my means. I think I'm gonna stick with Mara's guidance on this, because I am leaning on sideways. I really am. On the other hand, there's a part of me that's like, just get a different cooler. But that's just stupid. This is a great cooler and it works well. And what a dumb reason to spend another $150 or $200 and then have this cooler laying around, which is only going to fit on more than likely a socket 1200 board, because I don't know if I have the rest of the mounting kit. Maybe I do somewhere. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's a stupid reason to replace it, and it's expensive. over something so silly. Tim says it came from an Apache helicopter and those fly sideways. Yeah, but it was upright in the Apache helicopter. But again, the radiator position was different. And that is changing the hoses. And it didn't come with the Apache helicopter. We decided on those parts. We just decided to keep it all Thermaltake, and Thermaltake had other coolers to choose from. That's the one we selected, and that's the case we selected, and the motherboard we selected. We just expect it's all going to go together regardless, the same way, regardless of who makes the cooler or the case or the motherboard. Turns out not so much. David Martinez says hello. Welcome in, David. Well, I guess I'm cleaning off some thermal compound is what I'm doing. But you understand why. That's why I say there's always exceptions. And it just so happens this would be one of those exceptions. If the plate's not going on the same way, then the compound's not going to apply the previous compound isn't going to align efficiently. It may not actually make much difference in reality, because as the system heats up, the thermal compound, it becomes viscous and it will, move as a type of a fluid. But it may not fill in the gaps. I don't know. So at least if I do it this way, I know for sure that it's done right. So we wipe down the vast majority of it with a paper towel, right? Just get it clean to a point. And then when it comes to like really polishing it, that's when we grab the Q-tips and the isopropyl alcohol. We want the highest alcohol content possible. I'm also going to need a nitrile glove to reapply new thermal compound. And then we'll just seat that down, hook up the fans, turn it on, make sure that we haven't broken anything. So that means I have to hook this up temporarily, but I'm not going to mount it. It's not going to look pretty yet. We just want to verify everything works. And then the rest will be, we'll have to get a power supply in here. I'll just grab a spare power supply or something. I don't know. We're running out of time, so let's see how far I get. $2 from David Graham. She had a beautiful baby girl at 5 pounds. 5 pounds? Well, congratulations to her. And now I guess you're the uncle, huh? If you weren't before. No more Uncle Carey. Now it's Uncle David. So when I put the isopropyl alcohol on here, you don't normally have to dry it, but what I'm trying to do is just pick up any other thermal material. People go way over the top with this. Like, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. But I figure while I'm in here, I'm going to clean it reasonably, but not obsessively. Because you could sit here and scrub on this till the Q-tip comes up clean, and you'll be actually pulling material right off the base. That'll come up dark, and you might think that's thermal material, and it isn't. So again, there is a middle ground here that we're looking for. And it does not have to be perfect, because likely it won't make any difference, measurable difference, in your cooling. This once again becomes more of a psychological issue. However, if you want to spend a half an hour spit polishing that and pulling the metal up because you think it's thermal material, don't let me get in your way. We're going to get rid of that. We'll get out one of my nitrile gloves here so we can spread that thermal material. And I'm going to lay the case back flat so I'm not fighting with the pump to seat. cringeworthy. Well, looking at the light, I could do a little better job here on the cooler. Just saw a little spot. See, now I'm being that obsessive person. Telling you that little spot won't make any real world difference. I'll use some of my Scythe. I've got a lot of this thermal compound left over from Scythe coolers back in the day, and it's still really good. It's got a lot of moisture in it. It has not become clay-like yet, and there's still more in that tube. And we're just going to finger paint that so that it covers the entire surface of the CPU evenly. And I don't have to trust that if I put a pea-sized dab, it's actually going to spread out evenly. I'm not a member of that level of faith. I need to see it. And I need to verify I have 100% CPU coverage and it's even, that I don't have a lump over here. And I don't want it lumpy. I want it even. I tap on the thermal material to give it little peaks and spikes. That way when I sit the block on top of it, it'll flatten it out, and that takes care of any concern of any air bubbles, which again aren't necessarily harmful. It's again more of a psychological concern. It doesn't really make any noticeable difference in temperature regardless, but it does help avoid needless arguments from what are essentially people sitting on a couch watching, telling me how I'm doing it wrong, which is very frustrating because they're all invited to show me how to do it. They just need to turn on their camera and do it, and none of them ever do. So, you know, when it actually comes to doing something, they're quick about telling you how to do it, but they won't show you. They won't lead by example, and that should tell you all you need to know about whether or not you should listen to them, in my opinion. All right, now let me orient the cooler. Which way are we going? We're going to go sideways, put the logo, which means the hoses go towards the RAM. Yeah. Yeah, that looks a lot better. It really does. Okay, so I have to hold the pump down. And again, this is going to be a lot easier if you're not working on the case upright. But it also means you guys don't get very much of a visual when I have to work on the case this way. But I'd rather be real about it than just put on a good show that doesn't really match reality. I know you may not be used to that here on YouTube. Now I'm just starting these just so I don't have to keep holding the pump down. Okay, so with all of these started, use a big screwdriver here and we can start bringing down one corner, go to another corner, start turning that one. Now I gotta take them all the way down. Give them a few turns each, move to the opposite corner. And start again. Back to another corner, opposite corner, opposite corner, opposite corner. Now at that point, that corner has stopped. I'm gonna work my way backwards. Opposite corner. That stops. It comes to a dead stop. Do not take it any further than that dead stop. That one is dead stopped. Finally, that one is dead stopped. So we're going to go back over just to make sure none of them have loosened. Sometimes when you do opposite corners, the previous corner loosens. So we go back over all four opposite corners. You take them till they're tight. Don't crank them down any more than that. They've stopped. That's enough. Don't make me turn this car around. Now this is going to plug into the USB or the pump. I mean, this is the fan controller. This is going to go in the fan controller. So this is going to run out the back behind the board. That's perfect. And this powers the pump, just like a CPU fan. And next to the CPU fan header, well, you know what? This may not have a pump block. Older motherboards don't necessarily have headers designated for an all-in-one pump. And even though this was a pretty high-end board 4 years ago, it looks like we're just going to plug this into the CPU fan header, go into the BIOS, and tell it that's not a CPU fan, that's an AIO pump. So we're going to plug it in where it says CPU fan, and likely the BIOS was already set that way. Remember, we haven't changed anything. When we pick that up, that's our final look. So that way the hoses aren't twisted up. These cables, again, we're going to cable manage that, so you're really not going to see that cable right up there. Once that's tucked away, it's going to minimize what you can see. This cable here, this looks like it's going to go on to the fan controller. There's 3 ports back here that all look the same, so it doesn't matter which one you use. But in the fan controller is the thing that plugs into the USB. That's on the front of the motherboard down here. I need to stop hitting my keyboard. You can bring it in either from this side or the other side. There is a missing pin on one side, so it can only go in one way or the other. It just fits in there with a friction fit. There's no clip or anything that clicks. It's just a tight fit. And then these cables coming off of the fans that we just installed on the radiator. Look how long these cables are. It's a lot to figure out how to fold up a tuck away, but luckily we have this large area down here that we can hide those cables in, so that shouldn't be too bad. And then we can get some double-sided sticky tape and stick the controller back behind the motherboard. Looks like there's a lot of room for it back here. Now, it doesn't matter where we plug these in. Oh, these just look like USB plugs. Now that's interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to change around then if that's the case. So these are all the same. Let's go here. No, these are numbered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It doesn't really matter unless you're in the software and you want to control fan number 4. Otherwise, I want them all to run the same, so I don't really care what number order they're in. But that's why you might care. Do I plug my lamp into the top outlet or the bottom outlet? It works the same. So when it comes to powering, turning this on for the first time, I'm not sure what power supply I want to use in this because I haven't decided if I want to put a discrete GPU in there. If I'm not going to put a discrete GPU in it, why am I going to spend $120 on a power supply when a $60 power supply will suffice? So for the sake of just testing this, so we can kind of bookend this video with progress, that everything still works, I'm going to just grab a testing power supply. And you know, the more I think about it, maybe it's time for me to install my testing power supply. I like to rotate them out after a while. This may be a good build for the test power supply, which is a 700 watt non-modular. Because we have so much room for cabling here, all these extra cables can be easily tucked away so that a modular power supply isn't needed. And 700 watts is enough to power most modern discrete video cards. Not all, but most of them. But I'll tell you what, for today, let's just get the front port umbilicals hooked up real quick. And that's going to start with, what is this? This is our front port audio. We'll bring that in down here and plug it in. Where's that go? I need my flashlight to see. Looks like the missing pin is on the bottom. And just like the USB header, it just plugs straight in, and there's a missing pin, so you can't put it on upside down. There's no clips, there's no clicks. It's a very tight fit until it hits the bottom of the connector. And then we've got what is this? This is USB 3. Now NZXT has this piece right here. This can come out, but that's designed as sort of a distraction to hide the cabling. And that typically goes, oh, it's not there on this board. Where did they move it to? Oh, it's right there, right beside the USB Type-C, which this motherboard supports as well. So let me get those plugged in. This does have a key or a notch, so it only goes in one way. And sometimes you will hear a click. Not that time, but that's in. And then our USB Type-C is where? Right here. It has a little dust jacket on it because not a lot of cases support it. That can go into the recycle bin, and then we can just run that through just below the other cable we plugged in so they don't weave. If it doesn't go in one way, turn it around. There it goes. Now remember, these cables are going to be a little bit stiff. Don't break the connectors trying to make your cabling look good. You've got to allow for them to sort of expand out a little bit. The last thing we've got to hook up is our front port switches and LEDs. And on NZXT, they make it all one plug, which I really appreciate. That's been a standard for so long now. I just have to find what I did with it. Here it is. This plug right here. We're going to bring that down and up from the bottom of the board, and it's going to go on this bottom corner here. Now this board has a very large connector. We're just going to the left edge of it. I think it's the left edge. Should be the left edge. And that's it as far as all the USB, all the switches, LEDs, all that's plugged in that easily. Finally, we can now plug the power supply in. Just clear a little space. And because I have not yet made up my mind on what power supply I want to put in here, we're just going to leave that outside of the case for right now. So CPU power. These do have clips. The clips go towards the edge of the board at most boards, but not all boards. We've got our big 24-pin power supply. Again, the clip goes towards the edge of the board on all motherboards. At least all ATX and micro ATX boards. That is an agreed upon standard anyway. Mini ITX, well, your mileage may vary. See if I can get that to align so I can plug it in. Come on now. There it goes. Finally, I need to give power to that fan controller. That's going to give the fans power and light up the LEDs, not only on these fans on the cooler, but on the block itself. So with that, there is one final connector on this octopus. That's a standard old school Molex power connector, which I'm surprised still exists today. We're going to just plug that in any Molex connector available from the power supply. And we should be able to turn this on and do a smoke test. Everything should be fine. Unless I've made a mistake, which never ever happens. I thought I made a mistake once, but I was wrong. That looks good. What am I going for? I need a power cable. Yeah, we need to just plug it in. So make sure the power supply is in the off position, which it is, and we'll give it some power. I need a keyboard and a mouse, which I keep over here. We'll set that down and turn these on. Plug the dongle into any USB port back here, preferably a black USB port so that it's not consuming one of my high-speed ports. It will not make me type any faster being on a faster USB port. Oh, my Windows, my browser crashed, so much for my little add-in fix. That did not work. Zach Bischoff renews membership. Now a member for 25 months. He says, hello, Carey, and everyone in chat. I hope all is well. Back at you. Hope you're doing well, Zach. Thank you for renewing your membership with us. Let me grab an HDMI cable and a Ethernet cable. Here's my Ethernet. Plug that in there. HDMI. Plug that in up here. And now the show can start. Turn the switch on. Sometimes the motherboard has LEDs on some boards that will light up as soon as you engage power supply. I'm not seeing that on this board. I'm going to hit the power button. Ooh, pump is a little noisy. Sometimes when people, you might have seen videos about people talking about pump position and air bubbles. That doesn't matter unless you're getting noise. So if you are getting a buzzing sound coming from the pump, that's usually indicative of air in the system. Now, some blocks do have a refill. I was just working on one the other day. They come with extra fluid. Other pumps, it's just because they've been off for a while, and if you just let it run a second, the buzz goes away. So the buzz is stopped now, it's done. And when we tested this with Cinebench, this thing was cooling almost unbelievably well. So if the system is normally left on, turned on and left on, you wouldn't hear the buzzing anymore. It seems like it's something, if it's going to occur, it's going to occur right at startup. And if you do have like a Be Quiet cooler or the Cougar coolers, they have the little refill caps you can open up, and they give you some spare fluid. It looks like water, but don't drink it. And it's to top it off. That's a normal degradation process of an older cooler, and some are better than others in that regard. Let's jump over to our video output. Have we booted into Windows? I don't even know yet. Let's see. I just want to show this off. There, now you can see it. And let's jump over to our video output out of this machine and into your machine. Oh, I didn't hook this fan up either. The rear fan is not turning, but we don't need it at this point. It's fine. I also want to turn that fan around. Regardless, I want all the airflow going the other way, right, as I described earlier. Oh, yeah, we're in Windows. So to give you an idea, if you missed the other shows, these were our benchmarks for the internal solid-state drive. So generation 3, because it's 10th gen, and we're right at that 3600 maximum speed. We're right bumped up against it. So that's running perfectly. If we look at our Cinebench results, I want you to see our score on multi-core and single core, okay? And then, and remember, you can always rewind these videos and pause them. I want you to look at our temperatures after running both tests for 10 minutes. We never exceeded 74 degrees Celsius. That's how good this liquid cooler works, and why I'm not eager to replace it even if the logo is sideways. That's really great cooling on a 10900K at full bore, flat out. You know, again, it's a total of 20 minutes of a torture test that it sailed through like it was nothing with a maximum 74 degree Celsius temp. So I want to leave it alone if it ain't broke. And I think that's it for today. That was my goal. And go back over to camera 1. There I am. Final questions, comments. This is the time to ask. It is 7:30 p.m. Phoenix time, which which is a bit late for us. I should probably eat something today. And this is a nice clean break point. I'll figure out what power supply I'm going to put in here. I might just stick with this one. It's already out of the box. I'll just grab another one and use it as a tester. We'll just consider this well tested, as well as the motherboard. Turn that rear fan around. Then all of our airflow is moving this way. And we're done. That's the build. Little cable management. And an incredibly fast system with that little buzzing in the beginning, which, you know, I'll have to turn it off and back on to see if it's going to do that every time, or if that was just, you know, like a priming itself. I don't know yet. But regardless, it runs so well, it's not creating any issues. And after it's been on for about 40 seconds, it's gone. So I think, you know, especially as these pumps get older, they all do fail. I mean, if we're already at 4 years, we probably have another 4, maybe 5 years left in it. This may be indicative of something coming, but so far, it's good. John Williams says, Carey, very nice, and thanks for the live stream. Well, thank you, John. William Denton said, I'd keep the logo right side up, and I'd clean up the old thermal compound and put on new. Well, if I kept it right side up, there'd be no reason to put any thermal compound on it because there's nothing wrong with it. You could if you wanted to, but it really would be a waste of time. But by turning it, keeping it sideways, now the thermal compound won't align properly with what was there. But again, that's all explained earlier in the video. So I just don't want to do work I don't have to do, right? A lot of home users do stuff I wouldn't do. So I'm not telling you not to do it, just explaining why I wouldn't. And the exception and why I did change the thermal compound is because I did rotate the cooler. Craig Casabona with a $20 super chat. Thank you, Craig. Oh, Mark Gaines finally got back to me here. He's having an issue with one of his Windows updates. Let's take a quick look. Real quick look here. See if we can't help out Mark before we wrap it up. He has got Windows 11 and he is trying to install KB 505 1987. Good year, 1987. It's a good year. WindowsLatest.com says that particular update does break File Explorer and the install fails on Windows 11 24H2 on some systems. Let's look at that together. Windows 11, the update that came out this month, it's one of the biggest releases in the past few months, but it's not installing for some users and causing others problems. Now, I haven't experienced any issues with this update at all. On any of the systems, and I've got at least 20 or 30 systems I put these updates on when they come out, and never have I seen it fail or cause a consequence, a side effect. However, some people are. In our test, when we updated 24H2 to this update, our HP Spectra camera stopped working. In addition, this breaks File Explorer. Do you have an HP computer, Mark, or is this something you built yourself? It's had an issue that, you know, Mark doesn't have this problem yet because he can't get it to install, but some people who have installed it have explained that File Explorer is not responding when you try to open folders like desktop documents or pictures. But it's not crashing, it's just really slow. I'm just going to scroll through this and I'm not going to read the whole thing. Some people that use MSI systems said that it gets stuck at 0% for hours. Some waited 4 to 6 hours with no progress. But again, Mark isn't saying that. He's saying his is failing. If the download's stuck, you would clear the software distribution folder. But again, then we have a camera that's likely driver related. If you have issues after installing the update, they recommend uninstalling the update. Well, that's very helpful. That's all it says. Now, normally I like this author, Mayank Parmar. I'm not sure how to say his name, but he's a very respectable journalist, in my opinion. When I see that this person, I'm assuming is, yeah, it says he is the editor-in-chief. Yeah, well, and that fits. He writes very good articles. They're usually well researched. Can't say the same for what I'm seeing on Tom's Hardware lately, where they're writing things without verification and creating unnecessary panic in the community just because they want to be first with the information, even though the information isn't accurate. I've not seen WindowsLatest.com show that behavior. So, not that I don't like Tom's Hardware, but I'm starting to lose a little respect for him. So if we have a failure, there doesn't seem to be a suggestion on that. It is a very important security update. You know, this isn't whimsical. This is important. But if there is an issue with it, and the update just came out, it's likely going to be resolved by Microsoft in time if you just leave it alone. Don't pick at it or it won't heal. Let me look one other place just to check with regards to suggestions for resolving failures. Also, let me look in the chat, see if Mark has responded. If it's an HP system, or is this, what is the system you're having? Is it something you built? Is it AMD? Is it Intel? Is it old? Is it new? Help me out here. Kevin said he had problems with 24H2, so he went back to 23H2. I think we've got 24H2 installed on close to 200 systems without a single failure. So I don't know. It doesn't make sense. It's been the single best update to Windows ever in the history of Windows that, in my opinion, I've ever had to install. It's just rock solid every single time and never experienced anything on a large scale of installs. But probably something different about your system that isn't standard to the way I install and configure systems. I don't know. It's not a problem with the update. It's a problem with your configuration or how you've set something that you've customized it in a way that's not compatible. Almost guaranteed. Or you've kept it out of date. You don't have the latest BIOS or the latest drivers. Again, I put that back onto the user. But without seeing it, I can't speculate because I've never experienced what you're describing on. It's got to be close to 200 systems now since October. It just works. I don't say. Mark Gaines says he has an HP Envy laptop and no problem on installing this update. So what I'm curious about isn't necessarily what you have that's working, but what you have that isn't. That might help me a little bit. That might be a clue. I'm just looking through some search results. I see people that are getting stuck on the install, but I don't see, oh wait, here's one. System won't load the update. Says it's installed. A restart is required. I've restarted 10 times. So it does appear that somebody has reinstalled their Windows doing a repair install and it fixed it, that you might have a corrupt file on your system. Maybe. there's a lot of conversation in this thread. There's a lot of haters out there. You know, some people are basically claiming they stubbed their toe because of this update. So it's the update's fault that they stubbed their toe. They want to blame everything on the update that has nothing to do with the update. And I'm trying to sift through all that noise and garbage through this thread. Hmm. I don't understand what this person says they did. It doesn't make sense. I want to put this into the chat, Mark. It's my chat room. That is a long link. It's probably too long for the chat room. Darn it. I'm going to put it in two pieces, and you're just going to have to reassemble it. It's piece one. And I'll just repost the link by itself in piece two. So that link that's there is incomplete. That's the explanation. And this is the complete. I did it backwards. All right. Hang in there for just 1 minute. That's the complete link. Maybe try that and let us know if that helps you at all, Mark. All right, I think that'll wrap it up for us for tonight. And Mark, feel free to reach out to me in an email for, talking about this. Some things, it's fun to explore doing a live show, and then sometimes we need to wait for results and have you get back to us, and it just takes too time to wait during a live show. But feel free to reach out at our email address. Our email address, as a reminder, I'll put that right up on the screen. If I find it. There it is. That's how you can reach us. showcasecreate@gmail.com, and then we can help you there, as well as our forums. Again, the forums are CareyHolzman.boards.net, not .com, .net, and the link is in the video notes below this video, including, I think we have a link to the disassembly of the Apache, which led us to having these parts and why this build took place today, if you missed that. And again, thank you to Mara for keeping those notes up to date. If you're looking, as a reminder, if you're looking for a Windows license key or a Microsoft Office and you want to make sure it's legal, legitimate, and has support, and you don't want to spend a lot of money and you want to make sure you're not going to get scammed, use our links below for SCD keys. They're guaranteed. They have free support for 6 months, and it'll save you a ton of money, and you don't have to worry about being scammed. It's a real company. It's been around over a decade. And, if you want to roll the dice buying your license keys somewhere else that could be stolen or might abandon you when you need help, don't let me get in your way. But if you want to make sure that you're buying a product that's going to have support behind it, it's reputable, that it's legal, use our links and save 30% off with our coupon code. Just trying to save you money. Clearly at those prices, nobody's getting rich. Okay, that's all for tonight's show. Thank you for hanging out with us during our after-hours show, if you will. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody again, if not tomorrow, definitely on Friday. We have yet another build to do, so I'm going to have to get this wrapped up one way or another between now and Friday. 1 o'clock, we will be on as scheduled, 1 p.m. Phoenix time, and that's open to the public. As always, we hope to see you there in our chat room. Thanks again to everybody who has sent us their contributions today, which I have to find my screen. I want to say thank you again. There's Elgania with a $5 super chat. Carey, oh, there's a question from El Galena. That's what it is. Carey, how do you feel about Microsoft BitLocker support? Is it worthwhile? I feel that if you're in an industry like a financial industry and a corporation, that VPNs and BitLocker encryption and things like that are on the business side. Where they're regulated by the government and required as such should be in place. For individual users, I think it's a complete waste of time and security theater because no one's interested in your nonsense. And when I say your nonsense, what I'm saying is end users think their stuff is important, but nobody else does. It's only valuable to you. BitLocker encryption was really designed for businesses. It's on the Pro version of Windows, not intended for home user use. Also, not that home users can't use it. There's a home version for a reason, and there's a Pro version for a reason, and there's a reason why BitLocker is not included on the home version. At the same time, businesses that are responsible for other people's data, like their customers, and need to keep their private company intellectual property away from competitors that might steal it, it's critical that they have BitLocker in certain industries. But home users, it's only your data, nobody really is going to go through the effort. Unless you leave the doors wide open. It's more of a paranoia, schizophrenia, where, it's very difficult to justify that for a home user. That's my opinion on it. If you still want to use it, I'm not telling you not to. But I don't think anybody in there that's reasonable has anything worth taking to begin with to justify that. But the people who own their stuff, they love their stuff. And what I see time and time again, which is really sad, but I see that a parent of children has collected something, okay? And they've cherished this collection. It could be older family photos. Maybe they've invested a bunch of time into researching Family Tree Maker and genealogy and the whole history of the family tree going back 150 years. And when they pass, more often than not, what I hear is the people that it's being passed on to don't want it. It has this thing that was so important to this person that wanted to pass it on to the kids don't want it. But if it's a pension that's getting passed on to the kids, if it's money, they always want that universally. Like, it's pretty rare they go, I don't want the money. But the stamp collection, let's sell it and get some money, okay? The family photos that don't have any value, financial value, it depends on the kids, but mostly they don't want it. They don't have room for it. They don't know who these people are in the photos. They don't want it. In much the same way, there's probably a lot of data you find very valuable on your hard drive that you want to encrypt with BitLocker that nobody else wants. So if it makes you feel better, you want to lock some items that are priceless to you into a safe, you can buy a safe and you can put your little porcelain figures in there, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean anybody they robbed you would even steal them to begin with, or that they just wouldn't take the safe. That being said, in the world of business, BitLocker serves a very important role and is often required through regulatory laws like in the United States. You are required. But home users, it's not for you. It was never made for home users and is not included in the home version of Windows, which is what a home user should be using. But of course, there are exceptions. at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference to me what you want to do. And if you end up locking yourself out of your own computer, as most home users with BitLocker eventually do, there's nothing anybody can do to help you. You just locked yourself right out of it with no way to get back in. So if you're going to do it, boy, I hope you're paying real close attention and know where that recovery key is at all times. That being said, thank you for your question and for your contribution. And again, a thank you to others who have contributed during today's live broadcast, including Craig Casabona, David Graham. Again, congratulations to David with his niece giving birth today. Thank you to Tim Sowell and, of course, our friend Mark Gaines there in Northern Ireland. A shout out to Steve Dodd, who renewed his membership, as well as Zach Bischoff. Both are members now 2.5 years, which is awesome. I can't thank you enough, along with the rest, everybody else in green in the chat room. Thank you for being members. Everybody else in the chat room for hanging out with us, being courteous and respectful. Engaging with you guys is so much fun for me. I really, really appreciate having you all here. Again, shout out to Marlena, as always. That'll wrap it up for tonight. We'll see you all again very, very soon. And until next time, bye for now.